will linger in your mouth long after the fruit has disappeared down your throat. South Africa is now the world's second largest exporter of citrus fruit. And some of the sweet, tangy fruit found in the markets across Africa are grown right here by the hands of the people of the Cape. It is also the largest producer of fruit juices and of wines. It is the city where the world's first heart transplant took place, where Africa's own mRNA vaccine is currently under development using African scientists and know-how. The city with internationally known universities, where the clothing and food industries have a long history, the city that overlooks Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for many years. Our people are diverse. You will see the proverbial colors of the rainbow etched in the features of the inhabitants, the hues of our skin. And in our accents, you will find the languages of the world in the sports city and the distinctive click in the spoken word on the streets. You will see Table Mountain, as you saw on the picture, rising above the city, and you will find valleys and residential outcroppings dotting the peninsula on which the city was built. You will see wealth and you will see poverty, much of both. And you will hear the sound of the jazz musicians like Abdullah Ibrahim, who has taken the world by storm. Drive out to the West Coast and you will see sparse vegetation and the home of the San people. Drive south and you will see the lusher vegetation and discover caves containing the ancient artifacts of our ancestors of more than 100,000 years ago. This beautiful city has a history forged by colonialism and by trade. In 1652, a few ships from Holland landed in the bay not very far from where we are meeting, with a backdrop of the beautiful Table Mountain, where lived the Khoi people, who herded their sheep and lived from the plenty of the ocean. The Dutch proceeded to stake out a piece of their land and built a fort or a castile and established a colony run by a large private business enterprise called the Dutch East Indies Company. This city was the halfway station to the lucrative land of spices of Asia, providing food and a place to rest for Dutch ships, sailors, and soldiers during the trade with and the conquest of Asian lands and people. Over the next 180 years, the city was built from the labor of enslaved people drawn from today's Madagascar and Indonesia and India, from Guinea and Angola and Mozambique. It was from a small spice island that my great-grandfather was taken as a political prisoner 243 years ago and kept on Robben Island, later to be released into permanent exile in the city. The city was built with the labor of the Khoi, the San and their descendants, by the labor of the Amaxhosa, dispossessed of their land to the east of where we are. And in the city today live the descendants of all those who shaped our history, willingly or otherwise, from Africa, from Asia, and from Europe. And in a rare act of reconciliation in global history, our republic's founders decided that South Africa belonged to all who live in it, black and white. I raise this history because it illustrates two themes of the African continental free trade area: addressing the legacy of the past and deepening trade on the continent. The AfCFTA is a project aimed at addressing the legacy of colonialism that left Africa with small, divided nation-states and with fragmented markets. This, in turn, has contributed to weak economic performance. To address this, to combat the legacy of history, the AfCFTA is aimed at increasing trade between African countries with goods genuinely made on the African continent, avoiding the neo-colonial history of Africans selling goods largely made elsewhere in the world. This business forum's rationale can be summed up in a few numbers that speak powerfully to our challenge and our potential. It is about Africa's place in the world. Africa has 17% of the world's population, yet only 3% of world trade, less than 3% of world GDP, 2% of world manufacturing output, and less than 1% of the world's steel and car production. This then is both our challenge and also our opportunity summed up, namely to industrialize our continent, to manufacture more, to grow more, and to trade more with each other. It is to break with the historical pattern that Africa does not produce what it consumes, and it does not consume what it produces. And trade can play a role, for throughout history, trade has been the engine that connected humanity and linked communities. Trade exposed our ancestors to new ideas, to new ways of doing things, to new products. Across Africa, for many centuries, the continent was characterized by a network of trade routes that was used to facilitate the flow of goods among Africans, trading in many products, including gold and salt, beads and carvings, ivory and gum, metalworks and textiles. African traders crisscrossed many lands in search of markets for their goods. Africa had strong trade links with other regions too, in particular the Middle East and Asia, and our products found their way to Europe too. From the ancient centers of learning like Alexandria and Timbuktu, to the northern civilizations in Egypt and Carthage, the western kingdoms of Ghana, of Mali, and of the Songhai, the trans-Saharan trade routes, the eastern trading centers of Zanzibar, of Mombasa, and of Mogadishu, to the ancient southern civilizations of Great Zimbabwe and Mapungubwe, Africa had platforms through which it traded with itself, produced goods, and developed. Colonialism interrupted and deeply damaged the indigenous development of African trade and caused harm to our societies that has lasted for centuries. We can change that. It requires action by all of us. On Thursday this past week, South Africa hosted the 5th Annual Investment Conference, at which President Ramaphosa announced that 1.5 trillion rand of new investment has been mobilized into the South African economy over the past 5 years. Investment in building Africa's first anesthetic plant and the firm's facility that produced COVID-19 vaccines. Investment that is building new solar-powered energy units to supply electricity, new mines in the northern Cape of our country. Investment in food production and in new call centers, in expansion of steel manufacturing and tourism facilities. Investment that produced new vehicles like the Toyota hybrid vehicle, the Corolla Cross, or the Isuzu D-Max and the Ford Ranger vehicles. The Mercedes C-Class is produced now in 3 cities in the world: Bremen in Germany, Beijing in China, and Buffalo City here in South Africa. And so when you buy or see a C-Class Mercedes-Benz in Europe or in India or in Brazil, chances are it is made here on the African continent. Investment in digital infrastructure, from fiber optic cables to cell phone mast towers to an undersea cable that, among others, connect West Africa and South Africa. And that cable goes by the name of Equiano. Let me digress for a moment on that name. In 2019, the Undersea Project was named after an extraordinary man, Oluhauda Equiano, who wrote a best-selling autobiography in the 1780s about slavery and who played an active role in the fight against slavery. His memoir records that he was born around 1745 in the village of Isaka in the Kingdom of Benin, in what is present-day Nigeria. His story continues with an account of his capture at the age of 11 years old, and the sale to slavers who put him on a ship for a journey across the Atlantic Ocean with 244 other enslaved Africans to Barbados and then to Virginia in the United States. He later moved with his slave master to the UK and he bought his freedom. His memoir was entitled The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano or Gustav Vasa, the African. His campaign against slavery took him across the United Kingdom, and he married a British woman and had 2 children. What an extraordinary story. And when we use the internet, we should tip our hat to an African who fought against slavery. I return to the investment conference that I spoke of. It is one example of us as Africans changing our storyline of deepening the levels of industrialization, of investment in infrastructure, of building new sectors. I was particularly proud that some of the announcements were made by businesses from other African countries who see opportunity in the South African market. We want more of that, more African investors coming to invest in our manufacturing, digital, and financial sectors. At the same time, we want more South African investors to set up operations in North Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa, in Central and other parts of Southern Africa. The AfCFTA is a similar intervention of us changing our history, about the opportunity to create larger markets. Private firms, citizens, consumers, workers, they all participate in and indeed make up what is our markets. Every day African firms produce and trade, and we have many of those firms here today. We have with us today those who manufacture clothing and cars, who grow citrus and potatoes, who make bedspreads and medicines. We have financiers and educators, small businesses and large ones, manufacturers, miners and merchants. We have businesses owned by women, businesses owned by young people. We have logistics and transport businesses, companies in the ICT sector. We warmly welcome every business delegate here today. We have trade ministers, ambassadors, government officials, regulators, and other public functionaries present. The representatives here today come from across the continent, covering 47 countries, from small states to large economies. Over the next few days, you will have a packed program covering progress, but also opportunities for your businesses. It has been my honor to serve as the chairperson of the Council of Ministers when we finalized the rules of origin for the core items that we today are able to trade with, the package that we are ready to commence trading between ourselves. We are an Africa confident about itself, ready to work with friends across the world, not to turn away from engaging the world, but determined to change the terms of that engagement. We continue to value the relationship with the United States and with China, with Europe and with Asia and the Middle East, and with Latin America. Now, our focus is on building our capabilities, African industries, the African economy. I have come here today in a car made by African hands, wearing a suit proudly made on the African continent. And I now officially welcome you and open this, the inaugural AfCFTA Business Forum. I thank you.
And we thank you, Honorable Ibrahim Patel. Firstly, for the magic woven in your words as you reminded us of the rich tapestry of African cultures and traditions that have shaped our local civilizations and our contributions to global civilization and humankind. Some of the stories you shared were painful, but you also demonstrated how African people, African nations and societies have risen from those ashes to turn something tragic into something beautiful. And we pray that through trade and better collaboration, that this is a phoenix rising from its economic ashes to become and to do something really wonderful for a new generation. I believe there's an African proverb that says, those who plant trees today create shade for those of the future. And that's what you're here to do over the next 3 days, is to plant trees today that will shade generations in the future. Just before I introduce the statements of support from many of our friends and stakeholders, I just want to remind you of a few housekeeping notes, which is that on your chairs should have been headsets, earphones, that should allow you translation. And channel 1 is for English, channel 2 is for French, channel 3 is for Portuguese, channel 4 is for Arabic. I also did mention earlier on that this event is being live streamed on different digital platforms such as YouTube and various other communication platforms. And so what we'd like to do is to enhance the experience for you too here who are physically present. There is an event app, and we would like to encourage you to download it. You can use various functions depending on whether you have Play Store or iOS. All you have to do on your mobile app is look for Event Case in capital letters, Event Case, one word. Download the Event Case app and then select AfCFTA Business Forum event. And in that way, you'll be able to access the event app. And over the next 2 days, you can utilize the app to download material and also to look at the agenda and to interact with your colleagues. There's also Wi-Fi here in this venue. And for this particular forum, all you have to do is just go onto your Wi-Fi. AfCFTA should come up. And the password that you use is ABF 2023. ABF 2023. One of the sub-themes of this forum is One Africa. And it speaks to harmonization, unity of purpose, collaboration across sectors of society. We cannot go it alone. There's another African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. We really want to engender that spirit, that where Africa's going, it's all hands on deck. We want to go far, and we want to go together. And so, at this juncture, we're going to be hearing statements of support, and this part of the program is facilitated by my dear friend and really dynamic African moderator, Mark Edo. I think Mark Edo deserves a South African applause.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can you hear me? You can hear me. I was about to say thank you, Lerato. I was about to say all protocol observed, but I'll just almost observe it because I've been privileged to be part of this journey of the AfCFTA since 2015. And in fact, I'm wearing a badge that is quite a vintage item. It says CFTA, not AfCFTA. And in that journey, one thing that has amazed me is leadership. And there's been leadership by various individuals in business. But perhaps when I think about leadership and the AfCFTA, I think of the gentleman sitting right in front of me here. Because you have to understand, at that time when it was the CFTA, nobody really saw it, but he did. And he championed something, and he saw it, and he had the vision, and he believed in it. So I want you to give another warm round of applause to the champion of the AfCFTA and the former president of Niger. Thank you for your leadership, Your Excellency. Now, speaking of Pan-African champions, I don't know if you've had some coffee and tea next door, but there are placards and awnings all around the room. I'll tell you to check them out. There's one in particular that caught my eye. It's got pictures of past Pan-African champions. I saw Thomas Sankara. We love Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. There was Tafawa Balewa from my home country of Nigeria. And there was Kwame Nkrumah, the great Pan-African champion from Ghana. And it reminded me of something. It reminded me of something he once said over 60 years ago. He as they were throwing off the shackles of colonialism and the African Union was being formed, he mused, why is it easier for us to trade outside our borders with foreigners than it is for Africans to trade with Africans? I truly believe that he's looking down from above, President Kwame Nkrumah, and he's smiling in support because this is his dream in reality. It's called the AfCFTA. Now, we're going to go to some statements of support from some true Pan-African champions in business and beyond. And I'm going to begin with, well, actually, Audu Nepad hosted the Secretary General of the AfCFTA here in South Africa last October. And they had great conversations, and they had agreed that there would be deeper collaboration between their sister organizations, Audu Nepad and the AfCFTA Secretariat. In fact, the CEO of Audu Nepad was quoted. She said, "The success of the AfCFTA is the success of Nepad. We are in this together." So please give a lusty round of applause for our first statement of support, Her Excellency Nados Bekele Thomas, CEO of Audu Nepad.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Your Excellency Mamadou Issoufou, former President of the Republic of Niger and the AfCFTA champion. Your Excellency Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa. Your Excellency Dr. Monique Nsanzabagwana, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Honorable Ibrahim Patel, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition of the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Ahmed Al-Bazi, Minister of Economy, Industry and Investments, Union of Comoros. I haven't seen him, but if he's not here, it's okay. In absence, I greet him. The Honorable Minister of Cape Verde, who I met earlier on, all heads of international, regional, and national organizations, distinguished guests, fellow Africans, captains of industry, and I should mention my brother, the President of Afreximbank, and all presidents of the development finance institutions that are here, my sister, who is the president of the African Business Council, and also my sister from the Global Compact. Well, if I start mentioning everybody, then I'll be here forever. So I will say all distinguished participants. But most importantly, I wish to acknowledge and congratulate my brother, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the AfCFTA, who I call really affectionately my brother, my co-conspirator in the struggle to advance our continental development objective. Excellency, really, I applaud you. I also applaud you and the government of South Africa for the thought leadership you have demonstrated in translating a formidable idea into practice. The discourse, ladies and gentlemen, on implementation of the AfCFTA has emphasized the important role of the private sector. You have gone beyond words and provided the necessary leadership to bring us together. This forum represents a major milestone in advancing the implementation of our flagship continental project, the AfCFTA. I sincerely thank you for your efforts. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin with the sage words of one of the most influential African leaders of the 20th century, Kwame Nkrumah. He said, the forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keep us apart. These words capture the essence of regional integration and the vision of the African founding fathers, who envisaged a united Africa free from colonialism, exploitation, and conflict. The realization of AfCFTA therefore represents a milestone achievement in the long journey towards the African unity, economic prosperity, and social transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, since the establishment of the OAU in 1963, it's going to be 60 years now, regional integration in Africa has been identified as a key driver for continental growth and development. The Lagos Plan of Action, the Abuja Treaty, our own Agenda 2063, and many other continental plans and instruments have all recognized its importance in achieving Africa's economic goals. However, despite these pronouncements and commitments, we have failed to deliver increasing intra-African trade. Intra-African trade remains at a poetry of 16% of Africa's total trade, while trade with the rest of the world is at 54%. This is unacceptable. However, I should say that this doesn't take into account the informal trading that happens between countries. I was in Benin, and the informal trading between Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria is incredibly very high. It's also just takes into account, when we talk about the 84% of the world trade with Africa, it takes into account the commodity exchanges. And these are just the minerals and also oil and gas. And therefore, these figures we have to really pay, I think we have to really make sure that we are not exaggerating when we say there is only 16% of trade, intra-African trade. But, we need to really augment and increase and deepen and broaden this trade. Therefore, the AfCFTA is indeed a critical enabler for economic growth and development in Africa. However, we must not see it as an end in and of itself. It's a critical tool that we can and should use to create a more prosperous and integrated Africa. To achieve this, we must invest in the development of the private sector, in particular, the manufacturing sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the private sector, we know all, has a critical role to play in unlocking the potential of the AfCFTA. It is the engine of growth, we keep on saying, and the engine to create jobs. It is vital that we create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive. Unfortunately, the current state of the private sector development in Africa leaves much more to be desired. The lack of access to finance, poor infrastructure, and the high cost of doing business are just a few of the challenges that businesses face in Africa. To foster the growth of the private sector, we need to address these challenges head-on. We need to improve access to finance, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. We need to invest in infrastructure, including energy, transport, and ICT, to reduce the cost of doing business. We need to promote regional value chains and the development of local industries to increase intra-regional trade. In particular, the manufacturing sector represents the single greatest opportunity to unlock the power of the AfCFTA for Africa and stimulate employment creation. It has the potential to create millions of jobs and contribute significantly to Africa's GDP. However, our manufacturing sector in Africa is underdeveloped and faces several challenges, including infrastructure deficits, limited access to finance, and a lack of skilled labor. Added to these challenges, the fourth industrial revolution is transforming global value chains, and the manufacturing sector is no exception. The introduction of robotics, artificial intelligence, and other advanced technologies is resulting in drastic changes in the manufacturing capabilities of countries around the world. This has created a new era of manufacturing competitiveness with advanced economies leading the way. We need to catch up. To be globally competitive in this new era of manufacturing, the continental manufacturing sector must invest in developing the 4IR capacities. This means investing in advanced technologies, such as robotics and artificial intelligence, and integrating them into the manufacturing processes. It also means investing in research and development to create new products and processes that can compete on a global scale. To this, I also add that it's not just when we are at this level that we think of developing innovation or whatever. We need really to make sure that this 4IR is introduced at all levels, even at schools. We need to make sure that our schools are really relevant to the socio-economic transformation of our continent. Our deliberations over the next 3 days must direct us towards addressing these potential and pertinent challenges. Not potential, but these pertinent challenges. They must substantively identify the actions we need to undertake as a continent to unleash the private sector as a force for change. According to recent data, Africa accounts for just 2% of global private investments. And even more concerning is the fact that the African private sector enterprises are the smallest employers globally. It is evident that for Africa to realize its full potential, deliberate steps and intentional steps must be taken to support and grow the private sector. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I draw towards my conclusion, I would like to leave you with 3 key messages. The first one is we need to rethink the financing of the private sector with a specific focus on extending domestic credit. In 2020, the domestic credit to the private sector as a share of GDP in Africa was only 38.4% compared to 147.2% in the rest of the world. To fully implement the AfCFTA and reap the envisaged benefits, we must improve and promote access to finance, which is essential for businesses to grow, expand, and engage in cross-border trade activities. the lack of access to finance is a common barrier to SMEs and the manufacturing sector, which form the backbone of many African economies, especially when it comes to cross-border trade activities. Enabling these industries to access credit can allow them to expand their operations, invest in new technologies, scale up production and marketing activities, and expand their reach and capacity to trade with other countries in the region. Two, to fully exploit the potential of AfCFTA, we must focus on building the productive capacities and competitiveness among African enterprises. Your Excellencies, tackling non-tariff barriers and hurdles affecting cross-border crossings of goods is paramount. Equally as important is rewriting the narrative that only a small proportion of African firms, around 20%, are capable of consistently producing high-quality products at scale. Additionally, Africa's relatively low competitiveness is due in part to a lack of infrastructure, weak institutions, and low levels of technological readiness. Trade policies alone are unlikely to support inclusive economic growth on the continent. We must encourage producers to improve the cost and quality of their offers through innovation and technological upgrading to build dynamic comparative advantages to perform better than the competition. Lastly, Excellencies, we cannot achieve integration and growth, trade and development, peace and security without infrastructure. You may recall that the cost of poor adequate infrastructure reduces intra-African trade by 30%. It is within this context that earlier this year at the Dakar Financing Summit for Infrastructure, we placed emphasis on closing the infrastructure gap in Africa through increased investment and modernization of infrastructure. To this end, I'm proud to announce that we received 65 billion investment interest for PDAPAP2 projects in the transport, energy, water, and ICT sectors. Our two organizations, our DANEPAD and the AfCFTA Secretariat, have already initiated work to tackle most of these issues under the stream of private sector development. We look forward to hearing directly from you, the continental private sector, on how we can collectively resolve these challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, we have only taken the first steps towards the continental prosperity we all desire. We have a long road ahead of us. The next 3 days and the work we undertake thereafter are critical and fundamental steps towards final destination. As I close, I would like us to draw inspiration once again from the wise words of Kwame Nkrumah. We face neither east nor west. We face forward toward a glorious future, and we invite you to join us in building a better Africa for all our people. These words highlight the importance of looking towards African unity and working collaboratively to build a better future for all. It speaks to the idea that regional integration can help to create a more equitable and prosperous Africa by leveraging the strengths and resources of each nation towards a common goal. Like I said, and I repeat again, the African unity is one entity, and as such, the AU organs work together to foster and to implement the realization of Agenda 2063. I wish to reiterate once again and say that we are working hand in hand with the AfCFTA, and yes, indeed, we had our retreats, and we are going to have our retreats again to make sure that we have a cohesive, integrated program supporting each other and delivering the Africa we want. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, the President of AUDU NEPAD. Now, I would like to invite to the stage a gentleman who heads our continent's leading infrastructure solutions provider. It's having an instrumental impact on African lives and livelihoods. Please welcome Africa Finance Corporation President and CEO, Samaila Zubairu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, please allow me to stand on existing protocol. The slogan for the AfCFTA Business Forum 2023 is well chosen, Africa Tujenge Pamoja. Let's build Africa together. Now, what does it take to build? It's very important to have the right mindset. And the right mindset for building is a growing mindset. It's also very important to have conviction that we can get it done. Bearing in mind that there are several reasons why it has not happened before, and there will be several reasons why it will not happen. But we must find the reasons to get it done. We are here today. This is our time to ensure that we can get this done. Now more than ever, we need to find solutions quickly and implement them. Because the AfCFTA, rightfully the world's most ambitious free trade area, with potential for combined GDP of $3.5 trillion, can only be realized by building the essential infrastructure. Take transport, for example. Additional trade resulting from AfCFTA implementation will increase intra-African haulage on our roads. It should double the volume of goods transported by air from 2.3 million tons to 4.5 million tons. Maritime freight should increase to 131 million tons from 58 million tons today. Yet, as things stand right now, such sudden extra demand created by the AfCFTA will be unsustainable for much of Africa's infrastructure. History shows that when neighboring countries have good road, railways, and ports, cross-border trade increases, boosting jobs, economic growth, and industrialization. At AFC, we are committed to ensuring that infrastructure gaps are closed, and this is why AFC has mobilized billions of dollars for transportation. For example, we are focused on how to connect countries regionally. We are currently working on a rail link for 284 kilometers between Kano and Maradi, that is between Nigeria and Niger Republic. Ports are critical for trade of food, energy, and other consumer goods. We have a port platform that currently has 4 ports in Africa, and we have a pipeline of additional ports to be built. For example, the Takoradi port in Ghana is going to facilitate export and link with landlocked countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But perhaps even more critical than transport infrastructure is energy. We know that we have 600 million people, over half of our continent, without access to electricity. We need to ensure that they have access to electricity that will support production of African-made goods and services, African-made goods for trade within the Continental Free Trade Area. Our recent acquisition of Lekela Power makes us one of the largest producers of renewable energy, and the recent approval that we have got from the Green Climate Fund enables us to incorporate climate risk in physical infrastructure build. This is a focus we must all have to ensure that we build the right infrastructure to support free trade in Africa. There's also clear need and opportunity to invest in telecoms and ICT for enable comprehensive access to trade systems and marketplace interactions under the AfCFTA. This is an area where Africa, again, must look to our youths and innovation, as we have done with mobile money. We need to find a way to ensure that problems like access to visas, customs systems, border crossings are immediately implemented, and we should give ourselves timelines to achieve this. As we deliberate on the opportunities and challenges over the next 3 days, it is very important that we set timelines and allocate responsibility for how we can overcome some of the immediate challenges that face regional integration. It is very important, again, like I mentioned, for us to ensure that we have a way of deepening integration amongst the existing regional blocs. So, for example, we need to interrogate why ECOWAS is not working properly and ensure that we can fix that. We need to ensure that regional trade happens. We need to ensure that trade within COMESA, SADC, and other existing regional blocs come to life. And that is how we can build it all together as a continent. Building together infrastructure needed for the AfCFTA must go hand in hand with developing local industries to maximize the opportunity for free trade. Processing and manufacturing must be at the center of infrastructure projects, which is why we are focused on value addition and beneficiation of African goods for export. At AFC, we apply an ecosystem approach across a range of industries and countries, from agro-processing such as cotton, timber, and cashews, to base and precious metals and minerals. It is very important that we understand that we have another moment where the world is moving towards electric mobility, and most of the minerals and metals for that is in Africa. The electric vehicle market, or electric mobility market, is $7 trillion between now and 2030. It's going to grow to $46 trillion by 2050. There is no better opportunity for Africans to ensure that we structurally transform our economies and we stop moving raw materials for export, and instead we move processed goods. Again, the batteries are very critical for electricity and for mobility, and most of these are in Africa. Most African countries have one element or mineral that is required in the electric value chain. So what we need to do is to think of how we can perhaps adopt the Airbus model, where different countries make different components that are pooled together for manufacturing battery cells and then batteries. If you also look at the amount of trucks that we're going to need for the Continental Free Trade Area, there are estimates that we'll need over 2 million trucks. It can't be that those trucks are imported into Africa. We have to make those trucks in Africa. And we start by building the batteries in Africa. We have all it takes to build those batteries in Africa, and we must make sure that we do that. In each case, our focus must be on building integrated ecosystems and industrial platforms that can develop end-to-end value chains around a particular country's natural resources. This leads to synergies for multiple projects that can benefit from shared infrastructure, thereby de-risking projects. For example, we've had several conversations with the Secretary General, Mr. Wankele Mene, about how we can support with investment on the key important things that can fast-track the Continental Free Trade Area. In our minds, customs are very important, border crossings are very important. We're happy to make the investments for those pilots. We've just recently heard about the importance of infrastructure, especially regional infrastructure. We're very keen to make the investment. We're happy to do the project development that's required for that to happen, and we are keen to have proposals to make that come to life. Building together with our partner organizations, AFC is working to help Africa take full advantage of the opportunities presented by the AfCFTA. On 25th of May 2023, Africa will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the creation of the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. In this milestone year, we must seize the opportunity to unlock African solutions, African collaboration, and African capital to realize the ambitions of AfCFTA. For our part, at the Africa Finance Corporation, we extend a hand of partnership to all stakeholders so we can collectively deliver on these building blocks that are so critical to ensuring successful and comprehensive implementation of the AfCFTA. I encourage each one of us to use the next 3 days of this important gathering to make connections and find those solutions that take us a step forward towards the Africa we want. Africa tujenge pamoja. Let's build Africa together. Asante.
Thank you very, very much, Samaila Zubairu, CEO of Africa Finance Corporation. It reminds me actually of something I saw very recently. You know, sometimes when you hear these speeches, right, you know, you're thinking, you sort of, it's hard to picture how that really sort of happens in the real world. And I'll give you a perfect example. Benin Republic, I come from Nigeria, right next door, Benin Republic. Their main export is cotton. And for decades, they've been exporting raw cotton. The value has gone into other countries, other nations. In fact, probably here, many of you are wearing clothing that has Benin cotton in it. Well, AFC invested in a special economic zone called Glo-Jibe. I might be pronouncing it wrong. A special economic zone in Benin. And I was really moved when I saw this because there was an image of hundreds of, and I always think mothers and fathers, because I'm thinking they're taking money home today to feed their children and educate their children. Hundreds of mothers and fathers on looms, making thread, adding value to Benin's raw cotton, which will then be exported. Now they've got Zara and H&M ordering t-shirts. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about changing lives and livelihoods. So AFC, I'll now move on. I'll smoothly segue to another leading actor working very hard in Africa's infrastructure space. He's the Vice President for Private Sector, Infrastructure, and Industrialization at the African Development Bank. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Solomon Koinol.
Your Excellencies, first of all, our host, Minister Pandori, and also Minister Patel, Your Excellency, the former President of Niger, Your Excellency Monique Imzan-Bagamwa, the Deputy Chairperson of the Africa Union Commission, my brother, Your Excellency Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, my big brother, Professor Benedict Orama, the President of AfriEximBank, honorable ministers, commissioners, heads of international organizations, heads of what we call the RECs, the Regional Economic Communities, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all other protocols observed. Thank you for the honor of addressing you today on behalf of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, who unfortunately could not be with us today. This event could not have come at a more opportune time as we seek to recover and rebuild from the adverse socio-economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the supply chain disruptions and inflationary pressures globally from the Russian-Ukraine war. We need to prepare our economic development plans going forward with resilience and transformation. We cannot afford to be reactive anymore. It has to be transformational. If we cannot implement something transformational after what we've gone through COVID, I do not see a better time to do that. So, in my opinion, the CFTA is the game changer for the structural transformation of Africa's economies, and this is within our control to design and implement. So we look to our leaders to actually lead the way. I mean, through the AfCFTA, intra-African trade, investments, and exports will transform the continent into a real, regionally integrated marketplace with the benefits to the data that Lerato mentioned at the beginning of the session. Allow me, esteemed guests, to applaud my brother, the Secretary General, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, for creating this private sector engagement platform with a targeted focus on value chain development. His Excellency Wamkele and I oftentimes brainstorm one-on-one in group settings, and what I admire is that he takes this to action. So, my brother, congratulations. We will continue to support you as you convene these great platforms to ensure that we give Africa a chance to really implement this game changer. And let me even explain the game changer from a private sector perspective. We invest in private sector. Sometimes when we take a look as a financial institution at our non-performing loan portfolio, it is market risk that actually leads to the non-performance. Fundamentally, these are good businesses, but their markets are restricted to 1 out of 54 countries. If we can resolve that, all of a sudden, private sector, especially SMEs, the biggest creators of jobs, we begin to actually have a viable, thriving private sector generating the jobs with improved incomes, which is what we're looking for in Africa. So at the AFDB, we recognize that private sector development is critical for sustainable and inclusive growth for our economies and are fully aligned to the value chain approach. In convening us today, the Secretariat has identified the core elements for the success of the CFTA. To quote my boss, President Adesina's rallying cry on the CFTA, it must not be about creating a single large consumption trading zone, but rather a single large industrial manufacturing zone. Over the past 5 years, we at the AFDB have invested about $1 billion into various industrialization value chain projects, and we are scaling this up in parallel to supporting the effective implementation of the CFTA. It is of paramount importance in these value chain interventions that the corporates and the SMEs within these value chains are integrated into the design and implementation of industrial policies to address the challenges that they face with implementation. Interventions in increasing agricultural productivity and agro-processing will enable African farmers to integrate into the entire agricultural value chain and create opportunities in other related sectors such as transport and logistics, marketing and distribution, and many others. Agro-processors will be able to take advantage of larger markets, as I've mentioned earlier, and increase trade and exports of value-added agricultural produce. The African Development Bank is investing in agriculture and agro-processing across the continent, including about $1 billion in the development of special agro-industrial processing zones in 18 countries to transform these critical value chains. While we're doing this through public sector and PPPs, I also have to congratulate my brother Smaila Zubairo for the vision of AFC in creating Arise, which is one of the points Mark talked about, because this is also showing leadership from a private sector perspective that value addition can be significantly achieved within Africa. The Gabon example, looks into timber, where all of a sudden raw timber logs are not being exported out of Africa, but rather finished, nice furniture products are being exported to the US, to Europe, and other places. And so I think, Professor Orama, you've already invested, so it's just left with us to come along. So we look forward to joining you and, Smaila, in that venture. In response to the calls from the African Union and stakeholders, we have also taken a leadership role in consolidating Africa's farmer aspirations into a continental pharmaceutical action plan, anchored by an integrated platform for dialogue and financing to develop the sector. Africa imports over 70% of its pharmaceutical products, with only 1% of vaccines produced locally. Increasing local pharmaceutical production would enable local producers, or more so regional producers, to increase their share of production by at least 50%. This is not about import substitution, but one of the key lessons from the COVID period is we need to actually have a critical minimum security of supply, because we cannot really be left with our hands down again. We are also establishing the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation to facilitate, pharmaceutical technology transfer and access, to support our regional pharma manufacturers as they expand their production with GMP standards. So similar to the grant support that we've provided to the CFTA Secretariat in terms of implementation support, we intend to also explore supporting the African Medicines Agency, which will be critical for the competitive regional pharma production that will harness the AfCFTA, because this cannot be done on a 54-country basis. It has to be done really with regional centers where we have the ability to be competitive. Your Excellencies, infrastructure development is also critical in the implementation of the CFTA, as many have said already, and I would like to reiterate. So turning Africa into a real single market, a market where goods, services, and people move freely, from Cairo to Cape Town, from Lagos to Nairobi, demands that we plug our regional infrastructure gaps. And as was said earlier, by the outer NEPAD CEO, this actually is roads, rail, water, energy, and ICT all together. Because if we don't get it right, this adds to the cost, decreases productivity, and undermines government's efforts to boost intra-African trade. So closing the infrastructure gap is one of the most important steps that we can take to boost the continent's economic development, grow its business, and help Africa capitalize on the massive opportunities that the CFTA presents. In addition to our large national infrastructure project investments of about $11 billion over the last 10 years, we at the AfDB have also invested specifically about $7 billion in cross-border infrastructure projects. This includes the PETA projects, making us the lead financier in infrastructure on the continent. This includes one-stop border posts, this includes road infrastructure, this includes rail infrastructure, and we're equally active in infrastructure project preparation up to bankability through the NEPAD Infrastructure Project Preparation Facility in partnership with outer NEPAD. This facility has to date mobilized resources for project preparation that catalyzed infrastructure investments of more than $24 billion. All of this, of course, accompanied by trade facilitation interventions that target cross-border infrastructure development through the creation of larger and more integrated markets by linking landlocked countries to markets and supporting intra-African trade. Now, within the framework of the CFTA implementation, it's important to understand that national countries have a role, regional economic communities have a role, and of course, the CFTA Secretariat has the largest role to coordinate. So within the framework of CFTA implementation, the AfDB has provided institutional support to the African Union Commission, to the RECs, and to the national countries of about $60 million worth of grants every year to make sure that the CFTA implementation is really supported, given the leadership of the CFTA Secretariat. And we do this through what we call the African Development Fund's regional public goods envelope. We've also prioritized investment in digital connectivity to advance the fourth industrial revolution, to activate and extend the data economy. We've invested about $225 million in fiber, submarine cables, and satellite networks, which provide critical network capacity needed to unlock the potential and opportunities in the digital economy. We continue to innovate, especially to support our youth entrepreneurs who are the ones innovating in the tech and tech-enabled space, and also the creative industries, for us to actually benefit from the digital infrastructure beyond just the regional connections. So we look forward to strengthening our engagement to advance the mission of both the CFTA Secretariat, the AfDB, our partner institutions such as AfriExim, and also the AFC. We are also committed to investing in private sector companies and the SMEs in their value chains, especially through cluster approaches, and we'll continue to advocate for private sector with governments, the CFTA Secretariats, and the RECs to create the right enabling environment for cross-border trade and investment. And since I see Mark right next to me, on that note, thank you very much.
Solomon, my brother, you know I never want you to leave the stage, but time demands. Now, speaking of stages, I had the pleasure of sharing the stage with our next speaker at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. She held a meeting with a group of about 55 African business leaders. And she said one thing that stuck in my mind. She said that she discovered in this powwow, yes, how easy it was to come to a consensus around what's important for business. And that's quite reassuring over the next 3 days as we search for solutions in this gathering to how we're going to implement and drive the AfCFTA. Please give a warm hand to the Assistant Secretary General of UN Global Compact, Ms. Sanda Ojiambo. Now wait.
Your Excellency, the former President of Niger, Excellencies present, business leaders, and distinguished guests. First, it is my deep pleasure to join you here today. My appreciation goes to you, Secretary General Wankele Mene, for organizing this important forum and for the brief conversation we had that really highlighted the importance of the United Nations and the partnership with the AfCFTA. I want to begin by quoting the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, at the opening ceremony of the 36th African Union Summit, which was held in February. And Secretary General said, "The United Nations is proud to be your partner and to work together. The ties between the African Union and the United Nations have never been stronger. But I also recognize the enormous tests that Africa, and indeed our world, is facing on virtually every front. In particular, though, I'm pleased to see the strong focus on job creation and the enormous potential of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area." So I stand here today honored to be representing the Secretary General and the United Nations system. And as the Secretary General has said many times, the United Nations is committed and invested in the implementation of the AfCFTA. Across the system, multiple agencies are working tirelessly to support the accelerated implementation. And this begins from the strategic partnership between the CFTA Secretariat and the United Nations Development Programme, who signed a commitment in March 2021 to promote trade as a stimulus for Africa's socio-economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis and a driver of sustainable development, particularly for women and youth in Africa. Only last year, an MOU was signed between the AfCFTA Secretariat and the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, to strengthen ties to boost regional integration and trade in Africa, scaling up partnerships to maximize trade, investment, and development opportunities. We have ongoing multiple initiatives from the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa, UNECA, including the AfCFTA-anchored pharmaceutical initiative, as just another example. Simply put, from the United Nations perspective, our commitment to Africa's success through Agenda 2063 and the AfCFTA is a priority. The organization that I lead, the UN Global Compact, works alongside private sector leaders and a wide range of stakeholders to help build the world that we want. And this includes building the Africa that we want, for now and for future generations. From the perspective of the UN Global Compact, let me paint a small picture as to why the private sector and the AfCFTA is so important for business, for Africa, and for the world. We know that where business and markets and trade function smoothly, there are much higher opportunities for de-risking economies, for attracting finance and investment capital, for creating jobs and increasing incomes, and for building inclusive economies. Last year, the UN Global Compact built a uniquely Pan-African platform with a vision of the AfCFTA at heart. Mark alluded to it earlier. With leading African CEOs, we created the Africa Business Leaders Coalition, the ABLC as we call it, to unify and amplify private sector's voices. The initial cohort of 60 business leaders, which continues to grow, covers a vast range of regional and continental business leadership, from healthcare to textiles and banking to FMCG to digital technology. The ABLC has worked to define a new narrative for climate action in Africa, driven by the private sector, and with the clarity that the climate and energy transitions are critical for Africa's manufacturing and economic growth and trade. The strength and effectiveness of collaborations like the ABLC speak to why the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement generates so much excitement, offering immense opportunities to accelerate economic growth and regional integration with enormous potential to advance sustainable development. We've heard about all the impressive figures and the prosperity that lies ahead for the African continent. And this is indeed hopeful news when unprecedented crises, as we know, have eroded development progress in Africa and the rest of the world, as is the case. It is clear that we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2063, without responsible business leadership and strong multi-stakeholder partnerships. African and global platforms are critical to building the success of the AfCFTA. In 2022, the UN Secretary General launched the Global Africa Business Initiative, or GABI as we call it, a global platform connecting leaders to drive and invest in Africa's unstoppable growth. At this juncture, allow me to just thank many of you who supported GABI and indeed attended the GABI convening in September. That includes the generous support of AfriExim Bank. Thank you very much, Professor Arama, for your leadership. The participation of Wamkele Mene, thank you again, Secretary General, and of many in the room who attended GABI. This unique platform leveraged the best of the United Nations in support of Agenda 2063, bringing together collective expertise from many of the agencies that I cited before in my comments. Leveraging vast partner networks, GABI seeks to seize Africa's challenges and catalyze long-term solutions, very much aligned with the AU's priorities for this year. The African business community, we know, must utilize the AfCFTA to drive socioeconomic transformation. The next gathering of GABI will happen again during the United Nations High-Level Week in September in New York, and will focus on themes that are so critical to Africa's development and have been spoken about earlier today: energy access, energy transition, digital transformations, and inclusive growth and trade. As the Secretary General himself said at the opening of GABI last year, Africa is unstoppable. Africa is an essential part of global business and a major investment destination. So I do hope that as many of you as possible can join us in New York this September. Reflecting further on platforms, we know that South-South collaboration is critical to addressing the unique development challenges and strengths in emerging economies. We know that the next G20 Troika, India, Brazil, and then South Africa, represents 3 countries and economies that are able to drive very strongly the Global South agenda. So what is the future we want for Africa? The Africa we want is profitable, but also inclusive and sustainable, built on innovative public-private partnerships, but also not forgetting that SMEs are the backbone of Africa's economies, and that closing persistent gender gaps for women in Africa must be done if Africa will be unstoppable. So, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, with a view of the AfCFTA as an enormous catalyst for change, please join us all in harnessing these solutions and opportunities for Africa. It would be remiss for me to leave the stage as a Swahili speaker to not echo Tujenge Africa Pamoja, because Africa is unstoppable, and when Africa wins, the world wins. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, the platinum sponsor for this year's AfCFTA Business Forum is, again, AfRexim Bank. But why is it any surprise that AfRexim Bank is supporting the AfCFTA? AfRexim Bank always supports the AfCFTA. It's a trailblazing organization, and it goes beyond trade finance, from digital payment to designer creations. This organization is influencing development across the continent. And I'm always delighted to welcome our dear brother, the president of AfCFTA, Dr. Benedict Oke Orama.
Thank you, Mark. His Excellency Issoufou Mohammed, former President of the Republic of Niger and the AfCFTA champion of the African Union, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Musa Faki Mohamed, represented today by the deputy chairperson, our dear sister, Dr. Monique, our hosts, Honorable Minister Spando and Honorable Minister Patel, the CEO of Alda Nepad, the President of the AFC, Somalia, the Vice President of the African Union, Solomon, the Assistant Secretary General of the UN and leader of the Global Compact, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's always uplifting to be in Cape Town. And after listening to His Excellency, the Honorable Minister Patel today, it even became much more uplifting. But today I'm particularly pleased to be here and to have been given the opportunity to deliver remarks at the opening ceremony of this epoch-making forum. In 2018, amidst doubt, rumors, and dizzying twists and turns, the AfCFTA was born, much to the chagrin of naysayers. It opened up a vista of hope and opportunity to our people and rekindled the aspirations of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, who at their first meeting in 1963 passed a resolution that prioritized the establishment of a continental free trade area. It took almost 60 years for that aspiration to become a reality. We must, however, be proud that 5 arduous years since the pivotal day in 2018, when through the effort of President Yusufu and other heads of state and the work of the African Union Commission, the AfCFTA was born. We've seen tremendous progress. The African Union and the African Union Commission have quickly stood up a secretariat of the AfCFTA in Ghana and appointed, through a very competitive process, an indefatigable professional, His Excellency Wankele Mene, who with his colleagues has accomplished so much with very limited resources. Thanks to their tireless efforts, the Secretariat operates today seamlessly. And despite the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine crisis, critical phase 1 protocols, including the rules of origin, dispute settlement, the schedules of tariff concessions and service offers have been negotiated. Phase 2 negotiations have also largely been concluded, well ahead of schedule, including protocols on investment, competition, and intellectual property. These are remarkable achievements that will, in due course, accelerate the journey towards a common market for the continent. This business forum is therefore timely. It provides an opportunity to celebrate the remarkable progress so far made and to thank our hardworking and courageous brothers and sisters at the AfCFTA Secretariat, led by the powerful Wankele, for making us proud. It also provides a platform that reminds us all that it is now time for business. The theme of the forum, Let's Build Africa Together, represents a clarion call we must all respond to as business people gathered here today. AfReximbank is very pleased to be a strong partner of the African Union and the AfCFTA Secretariat in driving the free trade agenda. Notwithstanding many obstacles from within and outside the continent, AfReximbank has remained focused on the continental agenda. We have remained undaunted because we are mindful of the urgency to restore the dignity of the African. We realize that in that journey, your brother or sister can be your worst enemy. We also realize that it is the force of our will, the power of our brain, and the strength of our conviction that can give us the courage to make the difference in the pursuit of prosperity and happiness all of us Africans deserve. With the support of the African Union and the AfCFTA Secretariat, we have taken on the difficult things, those things that the African leaders identified as priorities in 1963, which have remained undone since then. In the same resolution that they passed at the first meeting of the OAU in 1963, calling for the establishment of a continental free trade area, they also set out other related priorities, including, and I will list them, establishing a common external tariff to protect the emergent industries and setting up a raw material price stabilization fund. Developing trade among African countries by the organization and participation in African trade fairs and exhibitions, and by the granting of transport and transit facilities. Establishing an African payments and clearing union, and progressively freeing all national currencies from all non-technical external attachments at the establishment of a Pan-African monetary zone. AfReximbank is pleased that almost after 60 years, it is collaborating with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union Commission, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and other partners, many of whom are here, to deliver on these aspirations, one after the other. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, is operational and beginning to serve the countries that have signed on to it, making it possible to pay for intra-African trade, including contracts for building major infrastructure projects in African currencies. Hopefully, in time, it will help reduce our debt burdens in foreign currency. AfReximbank currently supports the system with a $500 million facility to guarantee settlement finality. with the intention to increase this to $3 billion when membership expands from the current 9 countries to the entire continent. Finally, we can begin to save the $5 billion we pay out every year as charges and costs for intra-African payments. The biennial Intra-African Trade Fair, branded the AfCFTA Marketplace, is up and running. Thanks to the $20 million in support from Afreximbank on each occasion, and donations from equally committed partners, an aggregate of over 39,000 people attended the first and second editions in 2018 and 2021 in Cairo and here in South Africa, closing deals in an aggregate amount of $75 billion. As planned by the founding fathers of the OAU, we are beginning to deal with the constraints posed by lack of trade information to boosting intra-African trade and investments. And we are not doing this with a begging bowl around the world. We invite you to the 3rd edition of this fair to be hosted again in Cairo in November this year. Afreximbank has also launched a collaborative transit guarantee scheme to make it easier for goods to move across African borders. We have about 110 borders. The service is currently being offered in the Commercial region, where we are working with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union Commission to support a continental rollout, which will also expand our commitment to the scheme for the current level of $300 million to $1 billion. Beyond helping to deliver these early aspirations towards supporting a continental free trade area, Afreximbank is also heavily invested in its partnership with the AfCFTA Secretariat to make the free trade agreement work for Africa. Based on the mandate of the African Union Summit, Afreximbank and the AfCFTA Secretariat have created an innovative AfCFTA adjustment fund in record time. The fund is intended to support AfCFTA state parties and their businesses to adjust in an orderly manner to the new trading regime. It includes a grant mechanism to compensate eligible countries for tariff revenue losses arising from the agreement, as well as concessional and commercial funding to state parties and businesses to support their adjustment process. Afreximbank is the fund manager of the $8 billion fund set up with the AfCFTA Secretariat, and has committed an amount of $1 billion and a grant amount of $10 million specific to the compensation mechanism. I call on all partner financial institutions here to commit to this initiative, which in fact holds the key to opening the borders for effective AfCFTA implementation. And since for years we have been pointing at standards as a key constraint to boosting intra-regional trade, Afreximbank has also strategically begun to tackle this with direct grant support and those mobilized from Germany and for the members of the Arab Africa trade bridges, namely the ITFC and Badia. We have assisted the African Regional Standards Organization to harmonize 155 standards across areas of priority identified by the AfCFTA state parties, namely automotives, pharmaceuticals, and medical equipment, with work currently underway with regard to textiles. And because establishing the standards is one thing, and the ability to assess conformity is another, Afreximbank's indirect subsidiary, the African Quality Assurance Center, is developing quality infrastructure across Africa in partnership with Bureau Veritas. With these investments and others, they are already triggering. We will soon make the challenge posed by standards a relic of history. We've also made intra-African trade finance the cornerstone of our interventions. I have shown that it is not as risky as historically portrayed. Share of intra-African trade in Afreximbank's portfolio rose from 3% in 2016 to about 30% in 2021, on the back of a $20 billion aggregate disbursement for that purpose during the period. We expect to double the disbursement to $40 billion in the 5 years from 2022 to 2026. We've also created an African Trade Facilitation Program through which we are forging strong partnership with African commercial banks to help them finance intra-African trade. We've established partnerships with around 500 of Africa's 600 regulated commercial banks, and are well on our way to grant about $8 billion in letters of credit confirmation lines to these banks. We are making sure that in every African country, there is a bank that can open letters of credit and make or receive payments with respect to intra-African trade. AfCFTA is leveraging digitalization through the African Trade Gateway, which is a digital ecosystem created to facilitate intra-African trade. The ecosystem comprises an integrated and function-specific set of platforms that help surmount impediments to cross-border trade. The key platforms include the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, the Customer Due Diligence Repository platform called the MANSA, the Trader Club for Trade Information, and the African Trade Exchange, which is a business-to-business and business-to-government e-commerce platform. It is instructive to note that we have made these development efforts without sacrificing financial performance. And I say this because we have businesses here to remind them that we can do development while still making profit. In the 7 years to 2022, total assets of the bank and guarantees rose by 321% to reach $32 billion. Revenues rose by 271% to reach $1.5 billion. And we have had 7 credit ratings upgrade over that period. None of this would have been possible without the support of the AfCFTA Secretariat and, of course, the African Union. That's why we are here today, to celebrate a partnership that is truly working for our continent. We launched our inter-African trade and AfCFTA strategy, well aware that it will test all our faculties and demand great courage and boldness. We willingly assume those responsibilities, mindful that it is us and not others that will make the difference for ourselves. A beggar can never beg him or herself out of poverty. I take this opportunity to call on us, all of us Africans, to join hands and collaborate to address common problems. We should for once say never again to the famous words of our dear brother from DRC, Benjamin Burombo, which, with your permission, I would like to quote, and I quote, "Each time I want to fight for African rights, I use only one hand, because the other hand is busy trying to keep away Africans that are fighting me." I hope that going forward, we can all fight with 2 hands in pursuit of our collective welfare. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Benedict Orama, President of AfCFTA there. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063, and it aims to integrate and transform the continent into the biggest, largest single market for goods and services in the world, with an estimated worth of $3.4 trillion and a market of 1.3 billion people. And its success lies in us coming together to drive its implementation and drive its evolution. I warmly welcome our last statement of support from Her Excellency Monique Nsanza Baganwa, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Your Excellency Mamadou Issoufou, former President of the Republic of Niger and our champion of the African Union for the ZLECAF, AfCFTA. Our hosts, Your Excellency Ibrahim Patel, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition of the Republic of South Africa, the Minister, Honorable Minister Naledi Pandor, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, and Honorable Minister Ahmed Ali Bazi, Minister of Economy, Industry and Investment of the Union of the Comoros, who are our President of the Union for the year. Your Excellency, Mr. Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the AfCFTA, my dear sister Nardos Bekele Thomas, the Chief Executive Officer of AUDA NEPAD, Your Excellency, Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairperson of the Board of Directors of the African Export and Import Bank, AfrExim, Your Excellency, Mr. Samaila Zubairu, President and CEO of Africa Finance Corporation, and my dear brother, Mr. Solomon Quaynor, Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization at the African Development Bank, my dear sister, Sanda Ojiambo, Assistant Secretary General at the UN Global Compact, and my other dear sister, Dr. Amani Asfour, President of the African Business Council, and all of you honorable senior government officials from the African Union member states, distinguished development partners, representatives from regional chambers of commerce, private sector associations, women in business, youth in business, ladies and gentlemen. I bring greetings from His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, who could not be with us due to other pressing commitments of the Union. Let me, from the onset, thank our gracious host, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, for allowing us to regroup here in Cape Town, barely 2 years after hosting us in Durban during the second intra-African trade fair. This is indeed testimony of the strong commitment of the Republic of South Africa in supporting Africa's regional integration agenda. The adoption by the African Union heads of state and government of the theme of the year 2023 as the year of African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, acceleration of the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation is expected to generate greater political momentum, and this business forum has become one of the flagship events contributing to the acceleration of effective implementation of the AfCFTA. As the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area gathers momentum, it's important to allow the Pan-African business community to take ownership of this flagship project. The African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, member states, regional economic communities, development partners have delivered on this flagship project on Agenda 2063, and it is now up to the private sector to start trading. Governments do not trade with each other under the AfCFTA. It is the private sector that does so. A number of instruments have been put before you to start trading under this AfCFTA, and these include the AfCFTA e-tariff book, the Rules of Origin Manual, the African Trade Observatory, the Intra-African Trade Fair, the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, the AfCFTA Automotive Fund, the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, PAPS, the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative, MANSA, the African Business Council, and the AfCFTA Dispute Settlement Mechanism, among others. All these instruments and tools are designed to ensure that legitimate business transactions thrive. I'm glad that 47 member states have ratified the agreement, and this is a clarion call to the customs authorities to do the necessary. This is an opportunity for our continent to leapfrog as we recover from the ravage of the COVID pandemic and the geopolitics. It's equally an opportune moment to galvanize the continent from the extra-continent dynamics and start looking for homegrown solutions. Your Excellencies, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, managed to mobilize resources for the fight against COVID, and we have low death rates when compared to other continents. It's now important for the private sector to tap into this opportunity of the continent's recovery process. Governments of the member states will always do their best to ensure that the relevant infrastructure and security are in place. At the level of policy advisory, the Commission is working with member states to ensure that there is sufficient evidence-based information on regional value chains, market intelligence, resilient health infrastructure, food security, and peace. More importantly, we need strong collaboration on green industrialization. While the continent contributes less than 2% to the carbon emissions, it's equally important that we don't degrade from this already leading example as we industrialize. In recent months, there has been incessant requests for business partnerships from the US, the European Union, the India, China, South America, and others. I encourage you in the private sector to grab those opportunities for business alliances. It's from those alliances that we incubate ideas for continent-to-continent free trade. Unlike in the 70s, in this technological era, businesses led government policy decisions. Hence, I encourage you to own the African business space. As we gather here for the next few days, let us ensure we create business-to-business relationships under the AfCFTA. We have to start somewhere, and this AfCFTA Business Forum is an opportunity for us to do that. Most importantly, remember to include women and youth-owned businesses and SMEs, because for decades, the business world has been led by big conglomerates, often overlooking the dynamic potential and contribution offered by SMEs, which account for around 80% of the region's businesses, and yet continue to struggle to penetrate markets. I therefore encourage women and youth-led SMEs in attendance of this business forum to position yourselves in such a way that you identify and seize market opportunities and expand businesses' network, while I further urge all of us in attendance to move forward with intention towards the integration of our African women and youth-led SMEs into regional and continental value chains. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this requires a concerted effort that continues beyond the confines of this gathering and is characterized by key intervention areas of support, such as capacity development and skills creation, access to finance, access to markets, and access to information. This is what we, as the African Union Commission, seek to achieve through the Women and Youth Financial and Economic Inclusion Wi-Fi 2030 initiative, whose focus is the creation of partnerships to support access to finance and other priority needs that will allow women and youth of Africa to move up the ladder of change. Specifically, the initiative seeks to unlock $100 billion for at least 10 million African women and youth entrepreneurs over the decade through to 2030. The AfCFTA agreement is for everyone, therefore, and has positioned the women and youth in trade as engines of its successful implementation. In the same vein, let me invite you to the next edition of the Inter-African Trade Fair that will be held in Egypt from the 21st to the 27th November this year, where I look forward to an exhibit that showcases our purposeful and deliberate inclusion of African women and youth in the operation of the AfCFTA. Let me end here and leave the space for the business community to lead us. I thank you for your kind attention.
Is my mic? Aha, there I am. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, the Deputy of the African Union there. Now, at a time when global transport and logistics systems are being disrupted and trade wars are raging, relying on the rest of the world for our essentials here in Africa has proven to be quite a risky bet. You know, we learned the hard way during the COVID-19 pandemic when less than 11% of our people were vaccinated against or inoculated against this terrible virus due to inequitable vaccine distribution. And the world is realizing it again with the war in Ukraine and its impact on the prices of oil and the prices and food, the prices of food security. Now, removing the barriers to cross-border trade and championing the creation of a regional manufacturing hubs can produce vaccines. We heard from the minister from South Africa saying vaccines are about to be produced right here in South Africa, but they can produce much, much more. But to fully recognize the benefits of free trade and guarantee the AfCFTA's success, private sector empowerment must take center stage, as should investment in the AfCFTA. And that's why the Secretary General of the AfCFTA has chosen to call his speech, "This is the time for the private sector to drive the AfCFTA." Please welcome our convener and the AfCFTA Secretary General, Wamkele Mene.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, program directors, Your Excellency, President Mahamadou Issoufou, former President of the Republic of Niger and champion leader of the AfCFTA, Honorable Deputy President Mama Baleka Mbete, former Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister for International Relations and Cooperation, Your Excellency Dr. Monique Nsanza-Baganwa, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency Professor Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of AfCFTA. In her absence, Her Excellency Dr. Nados Bekel Thomas, the CEO of Auda Nepad, Honorable Minister Ahmed Ali Bazi, Minister of Economy, Industry and Investment, Union of the Comore Islands, representing His Excellency President Azali Assoumani, Chairperson of the African Union. Honorable Minister Ibrahim Patel, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition of the Republic of South Africa, President and CEO of Africa Finance Corporation, President Zubaira, Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization of the African Development Bank, Vice President Solomon Quaino, Honorable Ministers, former ministers who are with us, Deputy Ministers, Madam Kanayo Awani, Executive Vice President, AfCFTA, Assistant Secretary General, UN Global Compact, Madam Sanda Ojiambo, business leaders that are here with us today, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, manqale ngonibulela ninonke kuba nizile nisuka kwindawo ngendawo. Bukho benu siyabubulela. I will get into trouble because isiXhosa is not an official language of the African Union. And the African Union has 6 official languages. So I expect to get into trouble. But I welcomed you in the context that Honorable Minister Ibrahim Patel set out about the history of our country, and particularly the history of this city, which in my language we refer to as Isixeko saseKapa. I want to thank Honorable Minister for that profoundly moving introduction of why we are here today. Let me start by expressing my deep appreciation to the government of South Africa for extending all the facilities and the support to us to enable successful hosting of this event today. And so I want to appreciate my President, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, for the support. And when he does come to address us on Tuesday, the Right Honorable Deputy President of South Africa, Mr. Paul Mashatile. Also, my profound appreciation to President Mahamadou Issoufou for his presence today, having traveled all the way from Niger to participate in this event as the AU champion for the AfCFTA, appointed by his colleagues, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union. As you know, His Excellency the President has retired, and I do feel bad because every time I go to visit him in Niamey, it is not to check on his health, it is to give him more work, to make him travel more in the discharge of a historic mission that all of us have, and that is to serve our continent. So we owe His Excellency the President a debt of gratitude for his tireless effort on our behalf. May I also appreciate your attendance here today. Many of you come from across the length and breadth of our continent to attend this event. I know that we also have friends who have traveled from the United States, the UK, the Republic of Korea, and other places around the world who are supporters of the AfCFTA. Often we have to distinguish between the kinds of support that we get from around the world. And let me take a moment to share with you an anecdote. I was invited to a capital in Europe, I will not mention it, and I was told, we want to congratulate you on all the work that you are doing. We want to support you as Africans in what you are doing. We want to give you money, but if you take this money, you must accept 10 of our experts to come to sit in your office to help you. And so I said, well, thank you very much for the offer, but no thank you. And they said to me, well, where are you going to get the money? I said, I'm going to call Orama. And so I have been calling Professor Orama. I am very happy today that it is not only him that I'm able to call, it is today the Africa Finance Corporation, it is African Development Bank, and other African institutions whom we have to leverage on to make sure that we build a truly African and a Pan-African agenda for ourselves. As you know, the AfCFTA has now been ratified by 47 state parties. Only one country has not ratified the agreement. It's a very ambitious agreement, but it has to be ambitious because of the challenges that all of the speakers before me expressed. And so we have to take very, very bold, ambitious and courageous interventions to make sure that we reverse the 5 or 6 decades where our continent fell back. Over the last 5, 6 decades, Africa's economic character can be in summary defined as a fragmented market, colonial trade patterns, lack of industrial capacity, over-reliance on the export of primary commodities. These factors are the reason why Our contribution to global trade as a continent is less than 2%, and our contribution to global GDP is 3.11%. And so in the vision of our heads of states and government, the AfCFTA is one of the tools to be deployed to improve and enhance the condition of our continent and to place our continent on a trajectory for fundamental reform and restructuring of our economy to an industrialized economy that achieves value-added production in what we trade. Under the leadership of our heads of states, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, we've made significant progress in the implementation of the AfCFTA. The significant milestones achieved under the AfCFTA within a relatively short space of time underscore the political will and the shared vision of our leaders to significantly advance on the historic mission of economic integration and eventually a common market in Africa, with the AfCFTA being the legal foundational construct serving as an essential step to the common market, objectives of the Abuja Treaty, objectives of the treaty establishing the OAU for our continent to be united. This year marks the 60th commemoration of the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. As our continent confronts multiple challenges, 60 years after our founding mothers and fathers established the OAU, I believe the AfCFTA is a tool to be deployed by the African Union to position Africa to adequately respond to the challenges of our time. These challenges include an economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, a food insecurity crisis caused by the emerging geopolitical context, and recently what appears to be an onset of a sovereign debt crisis. In order for us to see the results that we all desire, the private sector has to play a critical role for implementation of the AfCFTA. Africa's private sector is estimated to account for about 80% of total production, 67% of the investment, and employs 90% of the working age population. As I've noted before, and indeed as my senior sister, Dr. Nsanza Bagwanwa, has noted, governments do not trade. The AfCFTA Secretariat does not trade. It is the private sector that drives trade in Africa. A study by McKinsey and Company and the Brookings Institute estimate that the annual spending by African consumers and businesses by the year 2030 will reach almost 7 trillion United States dollars, which is an increase from 4 trillion United States dollars in the year 2015. This trend is stimulating growing markets in various sectors where the continent has an unmet potential, such as agriculture and agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, the automotive sector, transport and logistics. That is why this trade dialogue is so critical. As an outcome of this trade dialogue, we intend to establish an ongoing platform for private sector to be one of the pillars of the implementation of the AfCFTA, so that jointly we can identify opportunities for investing in value chains that will increase intra-Africa trade. We must leverage on the vast opportunities that persist in various critical sectors of our economies to place the continent on a path of long-term industrial development. In a study that we undertook jointly with the World Economic Forum on private sector engagement, let me share with you, if I may, the following encouraging estimates. The automotive industry in Africa is expected to grow to more than $42 billion by the year 2027 due to increasing domestic demand, rising incomes, and high projections for growth of intra-Africa trade. Second, intra-Africa trade in agricultural products is expected to increase by 574% by the year 2030 if we eliminate tariffs on agricultural products. The AfCFTA also has potential to increase intra-Africa trade in pharmaceuticals, of which currently only 3% demand is met by intra-Africa trade, leading to more resilient health supply chains. Today, I wish to answer a very specific question that is often put to us. Are we engaged in a big diplomatic exercise where we meet, we take photographs, drink coffee? Is trade happening? Do we see trade flows across African borders? Professor Orama elaborately answered this question, but let me also take 1 or 2 moments to complement the response that he provided. We have established the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, as was noted, which has now been capitalized by over $1 billion. More will be raised. We piloted trade amongst and between regions of the African continent where there was no trade before. We applied preferential treatment rules of the AfCFTA in terms of this pilot where there was no trade happening before. All of the instruments that are required for trade to happen have been adopted by the heads of states: certificates of origin, origin declaration documents, an AfCFTA tariff book, and the manual on rules of origin. Certainly, the next challenge for us to overcome is to ensure that more and more African countries domesticate the customs systems that is required for the transit of goods to happen. On rules of origin, I'm happy to report to you that the Ministers of Trade have converged on 88.3% of rules of origin, which means local content. This is a very positive step forward for the AfCFTA because on the continent we trade close to 5,000 products, and previously we were trading on these products under global rules or the so-called MFN rules. And so convergence on 88.3% rules of origin means that we position our continent for potential investment and accelerated industrial development because the rules of origin or the local content will enable an investor, private sector, an entrepreneur to rely on a single set of rules for trade and investment in Africa. Where the Ministers of Trade have to conclude is on the textiles and clothing sector as well as the automotive sector, the 2 drivers of Africa's industrial development. Professor Orama again mentioned the work that has been done on the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, and I'm happy that he mentioned the historical context for why the payment system for Africa is important. Let me just point out what is an astounding figure related to payments in Africa. In the year 2019, Africa's transactions on SWIFT were $19.5 billion. That means that all of the transactions, the trade transactions that happen, a correspondent bank in another part of the world, most likely New York or London, is where this money resides. That is why it's so important for us to develop a payment system for trade in Africa. We have already operationalized the dispute settlement system, which will enable the resolution of disputes that are covered by this agreement, creating for the very first time a mechanism for resolving our own disputes as Africans based on the rules that we as Africans crafted for ourselves. I'm very happy that the previous session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government appointed 5 members of the appellate body as a step in the conclusion of the establishment of this dispute settlement mechanism. Lastly, as an indication of institutional establishment that we are concluding soon, the AfCFTA Secretariat is fully functional with the support of our institutions, the AfDB, African Development Bank, and others. A fully functional secretariat with a gender parity of 50-50, a secretariat that has as many men as it has women, including in the senior leadership position, and a secretariat that has all of the languages of the African Union and representation across Africa's region. 35% of the staff of the secretariat is under the age of 35, yet we have to do more to ensure youth empowerment and to ensure gender parity. Regarding other protocols that have been concluded, the AfCFTA includes, as you know, trade in goods, trade in services, which will cover liberalization of tourism, financial, construction, and other services that are drivers of Africa's services sector. The ambition of the African Union is that one day we must be a common market. That is why the recently concluded protocols on investment, intellectual property rights, competition are so critical to this very ambitious objective of economic integration on our continent, based on the Abuja Treaty, the treaty establishing the Organization of African Unity. There are two protocols that our leaders directed us to focus on for the next few months, and that is the protocol on digital trade and the protocol on women and youth in trade. Through digital technologies and appropriately tailored rules for the digital economy, the protocol on digital trade presents a very unique opportunity for Africa to achieve digital and financial inclusion and to enhance digital innovation in Africa. And in this regard, I'm happy that we're working very closely with Smart Africa Alliance and the UN-based Better Than Cash Alliance for digital financial inclusion. And here we identify opportunities for investment for the private sector to ensure that the tools that Africans require to have a seamless payments and financial services system, that those tools are available. And so to address this particular challenge of inclusion and to eliminate cross-border trade barriers that often young entrepreneurs and women-led small medium enterprises are confronted with, we hope that the protocol on women and youth in trade will enable us, as I've noted before, to move beyond aspirations, and which is important, and to present commercially meaningful opportunities for women-led businesses and for young people. In this regard, I'm most grateful to Her Excellency Mama President Samia Suluhu Hassan for having hosted us in Dar es Salaam for the inaugural Women and Youth in Trade Conference that was convened in September last year. May I conclude with 3 observations, if I may. But all of these observations shall reinforce the urgency of implementation of the AfCFTA for the African continent. The first observation is the impact of this emerging debt distress crisis. By all accounts, what appears to have emerged in Washington from the World Bank IMF spring meetings last week is that Africa is on her own in confronting the forthcoming economic headwinds that will be caused by the debt crisis that is emerging. Capital seems to be moving the wrong direction to a narrow group of developed countries who have high debt levels. Now, faced with this multilateral financial architecture that, in my humble opinion, appears not to be able to assist in mitigating the debt distress crisis, what does Africa do? May I suggest that accelerating the implementation of the AfCFTA and thereby increasing intra-Africa trade's contribution to Africa's overall economic activity is an opportunity that is presenting itself for ourselves as the African continent to overcome this emerging debt crisis. The second observation I would put to you, if I may, is that the collapse of global supply chains, which caused disruption, has placed and has had a materially adverse impact on Africa. COVID-19 pandemic, the current geopolitical context. In terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you know, Africa was in the back of the queue for vaccines. The current emerging geopolitical context has caused very, very severe inflationary pressures, which have had an impact on food security in Africa. And so this over-concentration of supply chains in one region or two regions of the world, clearly, in my estimation, is not in Africa's interest. The AfCFTA therefore offers us as Africans an opportunity to both establish supply chains to address Africa's underlying economic vulnerabilities, but also to advance on the establishment of continental value chains and continental supply chains that will support industrial development in Africa, leveraging on the rules of the AfCFTA. The third and final observation I would make is that we should draw a lesson from other parts of the world that have embarked on economic integration. The European Union, which started as a free trade area under the Coal and Steel Pact, from that experience we know the significant challenges, and these challenges shall sustain themselves over the period in which we are endeavoring to implement the AfCFTA. And the lessons that, may I put to you, we should learn is that at the center of any trade agreement, and in this case at the center of the AfCFTA, must not be market access, mercantilism in and of itself as an objective. It must not be that in and of itself trade flows, higher degrees of trade flows in Africa are an indicator of success. Rather, what should be an indicator of success is the extent to which, yes, there is enhanced trade flows, but more importantly, what kind of a trade agreement are we creating? Are we creating a trade agreement that must have inclusivity, a trade agreement that must offer opportunities for all Africans, a trade agreement that must offer opportunities for all countries, big and small economies? And so we have a very unique opportunity to establish the AfCFTA as an alternative model of a trade agreement that places development, industrial development, inclusivity at the center. Yes, it's going to be difficult, but our resolve to implement the AfCFTA must not be defined by the magnitude of the challenges that we know we shall confront. Our resolve must be defined by the promise and the potential. For example, the potential to deliver 100 million Africans out of abject and moderate poverty by the year 2035, closing the gender salary gap, and establishing our own supply chains, and as we trade, contributing through our trade over $450 billion to Africa's overall GDP. And so I end by saying, Africa's challenges are Africa's opportunities. By the turn of this century, as we all know, Africa is set to have the largest working force in the world by the year 2050, with a combined GDP that is estimated at that particular time to be over $16 trillion. And so the work that we are doing under the leadership of our heads of states is not about today or tomorrow. The work that we are doing is about, as we stand on the shoulders of the founding mothers and fathers of the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union, the task is for us to complete what they started and to complete the journey of integration on our continent. And so over the next 3 days, I wish all of us very, very good deliberations. And once again, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank the Republic of South Africa for hosting us. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I think when you are asked to lead a brand new organization at its embryonic stage, there's no template. Nobody tells you how to do it. And to have gotten this far in 3 years, to the point where we have almost concluded protocols on the rules of origin, where we already can see a roadmap and where we can dream bigger than what we could a decade ago. We want to give you credit, Executive Head of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and your team as well. Okay, it is now time for us to hear from the business community, their experience of transacting and doing business in Africa, and what opportunities can be leveraged from an African Continental Free Trade Area. I do want to say this. I'm facilitating this panel. Television rules apply, radio rules apply, in other words, sound bites only, and we must keep it to 30 minutes if we could, dear panelists. Can we be succinct, focused, and to the points, and can we help our policymakers understand what would make the experience of doing business in Africa easier? Our title is Accelerating the AfCFTA Implementation in the Current Geo-Economic Context, and I think Wamgelemene referred to it. We've just come out of a COVID pandemic, supply chain constraints, and on top of all of that, we're now dealing with a war in Ukraine and Russia that has again further increased the situation around global inflation and the pricing of basic industrial goods like food, inputs and fuel as well. So how do we manage the geo-economic context? Global business leaders to discuss the economic potential of the one African market, that harmonization, that unity of purpose we spoke about, and also creating unified payment systems. So that speaks to technology. And the challenges, but most importantly, the opportunities of trade and investments. And I think the African Development Bank Vice President referred to that. The opportunities lie in creating the ecosystem. And he said a really important thing earlier on. When we're talking Pan-African trade, are we talking a huge consumer market, or are we talking a real production zone for high-value goods? That is the essence of our conversation. And joining us are Dr. Amani Asfour, President of the African Business Council, Nompilo Morafe, Public Affairs Executive at MTN, Mr. Fayaz Rizvi, CEO for Sub-Saharan Africa at Procter & Gamble,
you know, this is
Mark
live.
Edo.
I'm not on it, yes. Yeah, this is live. This is the amazing thing about having a live event. I'm going to have to humbly actually step in and say there's a slight change. His Excellency needs to break fast, of course, because, you know, of course, it's Ramadan.
Yeah.
So we would like to, if we could indulge with the panelists, to invite His Excellency, the President, first to come and make his speech. That's what I've been informed to tell you. Is that okay?
It's quite acceptable,
You see, this
Mark.
is us working together. This is Pan-African unity here. So, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado,
All right,
if
so
I may.
let me defer to Your Excellency, the former President of Niger, and I'll leave it to you, Mark.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Please join us for your keynote speech. Give him a round of applause. Really.
Merci beaucoup. Madame la vice-présidente de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Monsieur le secrétaire général de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les présidents des institutions africaines, partenaires de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs des organes et institutions du système de l'Union africaine et des communautés économiques régionales, je suis ravi. Je suis ravi de m'adresser à vous aujourd'hui à l'occasion de l'ouverture du Forum des affaires de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, ici, au Cap, en Afrique du Sud, à quelques kilomètres de Robben Island. Cette tristement célèbre prison, aujourd'hui transformée en musée, est classée patrimoine de l'UNESCO, où Mandela a passé 18 ans de ses 27 années de captivité. L'histoire de ce grand homme doit nous inspirer en permanence dans notre combat pour construire l'Afrique que nous voulons. Une Afrique intégrée, prospère et pacifique, dirigée par ses propres enfants et représentant une force dynamique sur la scène mondiale. C'est l'Afrique de l'agenda 2063. Nous inspirer de ce grand homme, c'est en particulier retenir ses leçons, les leçons qu'il a tirées de sa dure et riche expérience. Parmi ces leçons, je retiens, je le cite, « Je ne perds jamais. Soit je gagne, soit j'apprends. » Vous me permettrez de recourir à plusieurs reprises à certains de ces aphorismes dans le cadre de la présente intervention. Je voudrais profiter de cette occasion pour saluer le leadership d'un de ses dignes héritiers, Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président Cyril Ramaphosa, qui, en accueillant le présent événement, démontre la volonté politique de l'Afrique du Sud d'être un des moteurs de la renaissance et de l'intégration africaine. Permettez-moi également de saluer Son Excellence Azali Assoumani, président de l'Union des Comores, président en exercice de l'Union africaine, dont une dimension du mandat est l'accélération de la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, thème de l'Union africaine pour l'année 2023. Permettez-moi enfin de saluer et de féliciter Wankele Mene pour l'excellent travail qu'il a accompli à la tête du secrétariat de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Les chefs d'État ne peuvent pas avoir meilleur profil pour gérer un projet aussi ambitieux. Toutes mes félicitations, Monsieur le Secrétaire général. Mesdames et Messieurs, le présent forum se tient conformément à la décision de la 36e session ordinaire de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement tenue au mois de février dernier de faire de l'année 2023 celle de l'accélération de la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Un gagnant est juste un rêveur qui n'a jamais cédé, disait Mandela. Le peuple sud-africain a pu vaincre l'apartheid le rêve est devenu réalité. Le bien a triomphé du mal. De la même façon, les peuples africains vaincront la balkanisation du continent. En effet, les conditions politiques et économiques de cette victoire sont en train d'être réunies, comme le prouvent les 54 signatures et les 47 ratifications de l'accord portant zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. L'approbation par la 36e conférence ordinaire des chefs d'État et de gouvernement des protocoles sur la politique de la concurrence, sur l'investissement et sur les droits de propriété intellectuelle constitue une preuve supplémentaire. Je sais qu'en dehors de ces instruments juridiques, il est attendu également d'autres instruments, tels que les protocoles sur le commerce numérique et sur les femmes et les jeunes dans le commerce. Je puis vous assurer que les travaux et les négociations sur ces instruments sont en cours et sont à un stade très avancé. Ces instruments supplémentaires devraient être adoptés par la conférence de l'Union africaine en février 2024 pour une meilleure inclusion dans le processus d'accélération de la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Ainsi, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement font tout pour accélérer la cadence. Le secrétariat de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine aussi. C'est dans cette perspective qu'il a lancé l'initiative du commerce guidé en octobre 2022 en vue de rendre la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine véritablement opérationnelle. Les 7 premiers États partis à cette initiative sont le Ghana, l'Égypte, le Kenya, le Cameroun, le Rwanda, la Tanzanie et l'île Maurice. Les résultats obtenus montrent que nous sommes sur la bonne voie. Cet exercice a démontré l'efficacité du cadre juridique des instruments de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et a permis, entre autres, d'obtenir des informations sur l'état de préparation et l'efficacité des systèmes juridiques et institutionnels nationaux dans les pays participants, d'aider le secteur privé à participer au commerce dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et à tirer parti du traitement préférentiel prévu par la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, d'identifier les interventions futures possibles pour accroître le commerce intra-africain et maximiser les avantages de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Compte tenu des résultats obtenus dans cette première phase du commerce guidé, des préparatifs sont en cours pour le lancement de la deuxième phase de l'initiative en juin prochain avec un plus grand nombre d'États partis et un élargissement au commerce des services. Je voudrais ici lancer un appel au secteur privé et à la communauté des affaires de tous les pays africains ici présents pour qu'ils manifestent en juin 2023 leur volonté de participer à la deuxième phase du commerce guidé afin d'expérimenter et de commencer à tirer parti des avantages offerts par l'accord de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Mesdames et messieurs, comme on le sait, une expérience pilote de règlement transfrontalier a été menée en Afrique de l'Ouest. Elle s'est avérée concluante. Le secrétariat de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et AfriximBank ont estimé qu'elle peut être étendue à l'échelle du continent africain. Le 13 janvier 2022, il a été procédé au lancement officiel du système panafricain de paiement et de règlement. Il s'agit d'une infrastructure de marché financier qui permet le paiement des échanges intra-africains en monnaie nationale, réduisant ainsi les coûts et les délais de transfert de devises étrangères pour le règlement des paiements transfrontaliers. Cela est très bien. Mais au-delà, nous devons faire avancer les projets d'institutions de monnaie commune, au moins au niveau des communautés économiques régionales. Mesdames et messieurs, le présent forum des affaires de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine est une plateforme adéquate et propice pour les décideurs politiques, les chefs d'entreprise et d'industrie, les acteurs du secteur privé panafricain et les hommes d'affaires et investisseurs étrangers pour proposer et consolider les jalons d'un commerce intra-africain véritable et significatif, stimuler les investissements intra-africains et mettre en place les moyens de relever les défis auxquels l'Afrique est confrontée au quotidien, en particulier en termes de commerce et d'intégration économique efficace. Si les accords commerciaux sont négociés par les États, c'est le secteur privé qui en est le principal bénéficiaire et qui les met en œuvre par le biais du commerce. La zone de libre-échange continentale africaine lui offre un marché continental de plus de 1,3 milliard de consommateurs, qui passera à 1,7 milliard de consommateurs d'ici 2030, avec une classe moyenne croissante de 350 millions de personnes qui devrait atteindre 600 millions d'ici 2030 et un PIB combiné de 3,4 trillions de dollars américains. En outre, la consommation actuelle du secteur privé et des entreprises en Afrique est estimée à 4 000 milliards de dollars, tandis que la vente au détail en ligne en Afrique devrait atteindre 75 milliards de dollars d'ici 2025. Par conséquent, le secteur privé est le moteur de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et constitue le principal acteur de la création d'un marché africain unique. Notre continent dispose d'un potentiel de développement incroyable, ressources naturelles abondantes et population jeune et croissante. Ces ressources méritent d'être transformées. Cette jeunesse mérite d'être éduquée et formée afin de pouvoir bénéficier du dividende démographique. C'est la tâche des gouvernements d'en créer les conditions. C'est aussi leur devoir de créer un bon climat des affaires avec un tel potentiel. Et sous ces conditions, notre continent peut attirer les investissements à petite comme à grande échelle. La zone de libre-échange continentale africaine a été conçue pour le monde des affaires, en particulier pour le secteur privé africain, qui doit saisir les nouvelles opportunités qu'elle offre pour les transformer en actions concrètes. Elle est le moyen idéal qui permettra à l'Afrique de commercer avec l'Afrique et de mieux peser dans le commerce international. Cela nécessitera la création des conditions de notre compétitivité grâce à l'adoption et à la mise en œuvre de stratégies commerciales intelligentes y compris la conclusion de partenariats commerciaux dans le cadre du présent forum. Dans cette perspective, le secteur privé doit jouer un rôle actif au sein des comités nationaux et régionaux de mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. C'est grâce à ces stratégies, notamment définies par le secteur privé, que les avantages et les gains attendus de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine se transformeront en véritables changements structurels pour l'Afrique. Cela est essentiel pour garantir que la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine contribue effectivement à l'émergence de chaînes de valeur nationales, régionales et continentales et à l'industrialisation de l'Afrique en vue d'un véritable développement durable et inclusif. L'Afrique, certes, sa mise en œuvre complète produira des effets secondaires tels que des pertes de revenus pour certains États dans le processus de libéralisation tarifaire. C'est la raison pour laquelle la conférence de l'Union africaine a demandé au secrétariat de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et à AfCFTA de développer et de mettre en place le fonds d'ajustement de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Cet instrument permettra de compenser les pertes potentielles de recettes fiscales des États, de résoudre les déficits d'infrastructures pour faciliter la croissance du commerce et faire face aux éventuelles perturbations de la chaîne d'approvisionnement auxquelles les États parties peuvent être confrontés, de mobiliser des fonds afin d'aider le secteur privé à s'adapter au nouvel environnement commercial dans le cadre de l'accord de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Cet instrument est opérationnel et a son siège à Kigali, au Rwanda. Par ailleurs, nous savons que d'autres obstacles doivent être surmontés sur le chemin de l'intégration, notamment la réduction et l'élimination des barrières non tarifaires, la facilitation des échanges, les infrastructures commerciales, la libre circulation des personnes, des biens et des services, la fluidité des corridors commerciaux, etc. Pour surmonter ces obstacles, il faut mettre en œuvre les autres projets phares de l'agenda 2063. Dans cette perspective, il existe une forte volonté politique de la part des gouvernements africains qui n'ont pas oublié cette mise en garde de Kwame Nkrumah il y a 60 ans, lors du premier sommet de l'Organisation de l'Unité africaine. Je cite, « Nous devons nous unir maintenant ou périr. » Ils n'ont pas non plus oublié le mot du professeur Kizerbo. Je le cite, « La question de l'intégration est plus que jamais au cœur du problème, voire du mal africain. L'enjeu est donc de taille. C'est par l'intégration que nous guérirons de ce mal africain. Pour ce faire, tous les acteurs doivent être mobilisés. Madiba ne disait-il pas, je le cite, « Aucun de nous, en agissant seul, ne peut atteindre le succès. » Les États et le secteur privé doivent travailler main dans la main, promouvoir des partenariats publics-privés. Le processus de domestication de l'accord de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, y compris ses protocoles et annexes, permettra à tous les acteurs d'être plus ouverts à ce type d'approche. Cela semble toujours impossible. jusqu'à ce qu'on le fasse, disait encore une nouvelle fois Madiba. La zone de libre-échange continentale africaine semblait impossible à mettre en place. Des progrès importants ont déjà été enregistrés pour son opérationnalisation. L'année 2023 sera une année charnière qui en verra l'accélération de la mise en œuvre. L'avenir nous appartient. Offrons-le à la jeunesse de notre continent. Avançons et construisons l'Afrique ensemble. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Ensemble, on va gagner et avancer. Il faut qu'on travaille ensemble, c'est ce que vous avez dit. Et c'est important que nous n'oublions pas. Je vous remercie, Votre Excellence, with heartfelt gratitude for the work you've done and for the time you've taken. May I just ask or beg your indulgence that you would stay on stage so that we could have a family portrait of today's auspicious event. And may I request that our excellencies, honorable ministers, heads of mission, dignitaries present would join us on stage for this photo opportunity. You'll be directed accordingly. Now you do. I think our delegates can take your seats. Thank you for that. We're just going to take a few minutes to allow His Excellency, the former President of Niger, to take his leave. And I think I'm going to take the liberty as well to say that it is all right for all other delegates who are Muslims, who would like to take a moment for prayer and to break fast. I think it is perfectly understandable if you feel the need also to make your way to break fast. Ramadan Kareem. All right, we've got two other items on the program. As I was introducing earlier on, we have a high-level business panel. We're going to try to keep it short, focused, and succinct, just so that we get a perspective from business leaders as to the opportunity and the cost and the challenges of doing business on the African continent, but how to solve for some of the challenges of trade. And thereafter, we will close off the session with a message from His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, read to us by the Honourable Minister of economic development and trade in the country. So if you would allow me, please, to introduce to you the panelists for this session. Dr. Amani Asfour, President of the African Business Council, Nompilo Morafe, Public Affairs Executive for the MTN Group, Mr. Fayaz Rizvi, who's the CEO for Sub-Saharan Africa at Procter & Gamble, Ms. Patricia Obozua, the Vice President for Public Affairs, Communications and Sustainability at Coca-Cola, Ms. Nongululego Nyembezi, the Chairperson of the Standard Bank Group, and John Don Bosco Kalisa, the President of the East African Business Council. If I may request all our panelists to join us now, just to hear from the business community in the room to set the tone for deliberations over the next 2 days, we would appreciate that.
Hello.
Hello. Still coming?
7?
I think you can stay here and then I'll sit at the end.
Hi.
Perfect. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. As I was saying earlier on, in the interest of time, if we could keep our interventions short, sharp, focused to the point. Just a reminder of the topic at hand, accelerating the AfCFTA, the implementation in the current geopolitical environment, how global leaders can discuss the economic potential of a one African market. Yes, let's address the challenges, but how can we increase intra-African trade to accelerate economic growth through industrialization and job creation? And as I was saying, the Vice President of the African Development Bank said something which I think should really and truly just be the preamble to everything we do here. Ultimately, in pursuance of growth, development, and opportunity, can we not create a consumer class but high-value manufacturing and production in Africa? Let that underscore the conversation we're having. And so let me start with you because you are to my immediate right, sir. Let us get a perspective from the East African Business Council. We've seen a lot in terms of regional integration in East Africa. In fact, many people are saying it could be a prototype for what the rest of Africa could emulate. And within that experience of the East African community, are we seeing the business community and the private sector taking advantage of this kind of integration? How are you doing it, and what are the lessons to be learned?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Mwene. Allow me to, first of all, convey my appreciation to the host and also applaud the efforts done by the Secretariat to organize this business forum. I'm bringing greetings to you from East African Business Council, the board, the chairperson, the entire business community. Let me say it is a paradigm shift. It is a new dawn for Africa. And the CFTA is going to be a game changer. It is going to be a game changer in the sense that there is a market opportunity. We are looking, numbers matter in business. Numbers matters. Economics of numbers matters. We are talking about a market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion US dollars. That's huge. That's huge. So as East Africa, let me first of all share with you, what have we done differently from other regions? And this is the news I'm bringing to this audience, is that when COVID hit this region, when the COVID hit the continent, World Bank had projected that all economies are going to a recession. The only region that did not slide into a recession was East Africa. You may ask me why. There were three fundamental components or elements that made East Africa survive from the effect of COVID. One, our commitment to regional integration. Two, our diversified economies. And that is very, very critical. The economic diversification was one of the savior for East Africa. The third that is very important is investment in productive infrastructure. When you travel around the region, East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, United Republic of Tanzania, you will appreciate the quality of infrastructure. Those were very fundamental in terms of withstanding or cushioning the region from the effect of external shocks. That's very important. Now, as we build back better, as we embrace the CFTA, there are important aspects that we are pushing forward as the East African Business Council. One of the aspects is that we need to dismantle our borders. We need to eliminate NTBs. The biggest gain is not through tariff concession. The biggest gain will emanate from elimination of non-tariff barriers. And that is a strong message we always engage our policymakers that we need to reduce our border barriers, the border obstacles. The second aspect is very critical, is to embrace regional value chain, where we have both comparative and competitive advantage. Let me give you three important value chains in East Africa that we are trying to promote. One, of course, is agriculture and agro-processing. We need to add value. The second one is pharmaceutical. The third one is automotive. The fourth one that's very critical is textile. And I want to appreciate the minister here, our host, when he said, look at your clothes. Where do you source your clothes? We must promote made in Africa, buy Africa slogan. We must embrace it. In East Africa, we say, buy East Africa, build East Africa. Buy East Africa, build East Africa. So our resilience will happen when we promote that slogan, that culture of buying our own product. That culture, that business culture, that shift is very important.
Okay. Just one challenge to what you've said. What are you going to do about the competitiveness of African manufacturing, especially in places like textiles, against the Asian influence? Because you've got to push volumes if you're going to do that.
Indeed, you're right. And I've been trying to leverage this. One important aspect, my brother Wamkere Mene, that we need to work on to enhance competitiveness is through our institutional transformations. Government institutions must work for business. So we need to ensure that the border, the customs arrangement really respond to the needs of business. That's where we'll get a big gain. So in terms of volume, in terms of boosting intra-regional trade, we need to build a strong partnership. We need to share experience, we need to share knowledge amongst ourselves. When we talk about automotive, South Africa has done quite commendable in the automotive sector. How can you pass that knowledge to Rwanda, pass that knowledge to Kenya, pass that knowledge? So building synergies and complementarity is another aspect that we need to work on. So that partnership among business to business aspect is very critical. And finally, that is important, and I want to commend the president of AfCFTA Bank. The issue we've been grappling with as a region that impedes productivity, impedes competitiveness, is lack of patient capital. Our current financing institution does not support the business growth. We need that paradigm shift in terms of having real development finance for our business. And the AfCFTA Bank, we are working together in terms of looking at how we can create export grant fund, how we can have that kind of patient capital that can stimulate business growth.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Procter & Gamble now, and you are very much in the fast-moving consumer goods space, the services industry, and that's kind of the new direction in which African economies are moving. But to value add, we have to build the industrial base, and South Africa's Minister of Trade said exactly that. Industrialization needs to be foremost of mind. So that's what you do. You manufacture, you process, you refine. What has been your experience on the ground running big processing plants? How can that model be replicated in other sectors as well?
Well, first of all, I want to sincerely apologize to you, the great host that we have, Loreto, because I'm going to digress from your message of succinct communication. But I can't start without expressing what I feel today. It's been outstanding. I mean, I salute the vision of Mahamadou Issoufou, His Excellency, the vision of the African Union, the excellent coordination of the AfCFTA, and the brilliant hospitality of the South African government. I had goosebumps when we started this meeting. It's simply outstanding. Now, coming to your question, that was precisely 60 seconds, I apologize again. But coming to the question, Procter & Gamble is a company, just to introduce briefly, we produce consumer goods to the likes of diapers, feminine pads, laundry detergents, healthcare products like Vicks, and we have been in the African continent for about 60 years. We operate in about 35 markets. We have created about 10,000 jobs directly or indirectly over the last decade or so, and we have created 300 plus SMEs over this time, but we are just scratching the surface. Now, the interesting fact is that 70% of our production today is local, that is in Africa. We have factories that we produce, but the irony here is that we are only able to serve the markets where we have the factories. We're not able to transport the product freely from one market to the other. And there are quite a few markets still, about 30% of our business, that we have to take products from outside. This is a gateway to creating the economy even stronger. Imagine if we can take it to more markets, we'll create more jobs, we'll create more SMEs. Of course, there are a few challenges that we need to take up, which I believe if we all collectively resolve, is going to unleash. We serve about 500 million consumers in this area every day, 500 million every day. And we have enormous potential to take it to 1 billion. What is needed, of course, at this point in time is elimination of all non-tariff barriers. Like, as my friend here was earlier saying, there are a lot of regulatory complexities in our region, which is one market has a different regulatory need versus the other. That makes production or mass-scale production a bit of a challenge because of multiple needs on the artwork of products. Similarly, the documentation needs of importation are very different among these markets that we have. Imagine if we have a standardization of documentation of importation. Imagine if we have the same regulatory requirements across all products, we would unleash so much more potential. We are very excited. I'm a newcomer to the African community. I just joined the job about 3 months ago. I am super excited with the prospects of this growth that we are living at.
You mentioned growth, and I want you to please explain to us whether we're just talking about numbers optimistically, or is it something you can touch tangibly? We're told that at its optimal level, we are looking at a market of 1.2 billion people, right? That's a population demographic issue. And if all of these people are able to transact, buy something, we are looking at GDP revenues of 2.5 trillion, maybe even 3. Are those numbers realistic to you, or is it still a pipe dream?
No, they're very realistic. Because if I look at my business, and I'm not at the disposal to share numbers, but I can tell you, what we look at is simply doubling our business over our 2030 vision that we are seeing, if we can actualize the potential. Imagine we are reaching 35 markets, and we are just reaching them, and we are just trying to reach them through 4 production houses, like 4 markets where we actually produce. If we have more access, clearly doubling the vision is something that we can achieve.
Dr. Amani, let's bring you into the conversation as you represent a Pan-African Business Council. And the question is, the private sector across Africa, it's not a homogenous block, and we shouldn't talk about the private sector. There's different experiences of people doing business in Africa. But where for them are there opportunities? You know, we talk about a trade, free trade area, but what do we mean for different people, for miners, for retailers, for banks, for ordinary men and women and small traders?
So thank you very much for this very important question. Let me first really thank very much our dear brother SG Wamakilimini for convening such a very important business forum and engaging the private sector, and also thanks for the host government, our dear brother, the Minister of Trade, thank you very much. Our sister DCP, Dr. Monique, who really focused very much on the women and youth and SMEs, which is the backbone of our economy. So your question is very, very important, because I always say we cannot generalize the private sector. That's why the Africa Business Council, established by the Heads of State Decision Summit, to be the continental umbrella of the private sector across the whole continent. It's really about we have among our members the continental, sectorial, business councils, union of industries, manufacturers associations, chambers of commerce, private sector federations, women entrepreneurs, youth entrepreneurs, SMEs, big corporates, and the REX business councils, with also the continental chambers of commerce. So our founding vision is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. That's why with the AfCFTA, it's very, very important to see we cannot trade, we cannot bring containers from China or Dubai to trade among ourselves. We need to strengthen our African private sector. So the strategy of our Africa Business Council is based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth. As our sister Dr. Monique said, the women and the youth are the majority of our actually private sector. And as my sister Sandra said, SMEs is the backbone of our economy in Africa. So if we talk about the private sector, our first issue, private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth, how we strengthen the capacity through information, through awareness, through technical assistance, but also through linking them with the whole policy organs. And that's why we are here, to coordinate the efforts of everybody to come on the same level. The second pillar that we have is policy advocacy. How we strengthen our private sector by policies. We are all talking about how the governments are giving the enabling environment for us as private sector, but what these policies can do for us to implement the AfCFTA. Because we are actually established by the Heads of State to fast-track the intra-Africa trade and fast-track the implementation of AfCFTA. So one of the policies that we are working on is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector. So whatever in the African, yes, it's very important, because whatever on the African soil, we should not bring it from outside the African soil. And that's why what we need to know is mapping exercise. We have everything on the continent, but how can we add value to this? And this comes to the third pillar, which is about product development. How do we have a made in Africa product which is standardized, which is quality, which is value added, branded, designed, packaged with international standard? Because a made in Africa product, if we want to promote our intra-Africa trade, we need to have a strong African product. So in doing this, and how we can do it within the whole private sector, including women and youth and SMEs, is very important. For instance, in West Africa, with all this shea butter, how much is the industry of cosmetics in the whole world? It's huge in trillions. It is not reflected for our women who is working on the cosmetic industry. Fashion industry is $2.2 trillion, but Africa is not getting out of it. Creative industry, the same thing. That's why also under Africa Business Council, we have more than 20 clusters that are speaking to the different sectors. So we have energy, we have investment, we have trade, we have agriculture, agribusiness, we have creative industry, fashion industry, mineral development resources, SMEs, we have women, we have youth, we have energy, we have 20 clusters that speaks for everything. So in addressing what you said about, for instance, how we address the different private sector, for instance, the cross-border women traders, they don't know about what we are talking about. They need to be actually aware about the AfCFTA. We need to train them and train the customs official of when crossing the border to know their rights, to know how we can have intra-Africa trade among ourselves.
Dr. Amani, you've used the term high-value goods, and I think that's very important because we're talking finesse, refinement here. You mentioned cosmetics, so I'll use that example. You know, anybody can make shea butter, but shea butter that subscribes to international best practice, health standards, packaging, that can pass drug and food administrative tests the world over. That's where the thing gets really tricky. And that's where many SMEs need support, is to produce the kinds of goods that not only are going to move from one African market to another, but can actually get on a ship and move into a completely different high-growth market in Asia. What's being done to really support SMEs to get them to level up?
So thank you very much. Linking our science and technology, scientific research and technology institutes is huge importance to our private sector, because this is how we really harness the scientific research to help our industrialization. As you mentioned, for instance, cosmetic, it needs certificates of health, it needs international standard. So currently, as Africa Business Council, what we're doing, we are establishing business incubators and business development centers to support our SMEs, our men on the ground in sectors. One of the areas also is minerals. On the continent, there are huge minerals, starting from the industrialization of the electrical batteries. You know, by 2030, we will have 200 million vehicles that will be run by batteries, which is electric batteries. And here, with DRC and Zambia now, with the start, with cobalt, with lithium, how we are going to invest as African private sector in this transformation of the minerals of Africa. Another issue is gemstones. All of our countries have gemstones, but guess what? They are cut and polished in Jaipur, India, and big designers like Bulgari and Graf, they go there to get our stones cut and polished in Jaipur. Why not here? So one of the things we are doing now is to establish training centers for capacity building of women in mining and small-scale artisanal to cut and polish our own stones. It's very important, my dear brothers and sisters. We need to have a mapping exercise of the resources, we industrialize it, and we have international markets, because this is our resources. If we don't work together, we are not going anywhere. And that's why I am really up here with all the government officials here, and even our partners that is present here. Building the capacity of our African private sector is not a one-man show. It is all of us together. And as we always say, going together.
Great.
Yes.
All right. Nompilo Morafe from MTN. So we talk about the concept of a one Africa market, and it means many things, but its one fundamental pillar is the ease of transaction. If you have a bank account in South Africa, you should be able to repatriate money in West Africa. If you get a certificate that validates your products in South Africa, you shouldn't get another certificate for the same goods in East Africa. And this is where technology really and truly can help to streamline the process. So our question is, yes, fundamentally MTN, working across 23 African and Middle Eastern markets, is about communications. But it's also about data solutions and digital solutions. In what way can telecoms be a solution here?
Thank you so much, Lerato, and good afternoon, Your Excellencies. Allow me to stand on existing protocol, bright yellow from MTN. So on that point, I just wanted to mention a few things about MTN. We're a mobile operator in 19 markets in 2 continents. But what's important is that 17 of our markets are in Africa as a continent, meaning that we are a company with enormous amount of experience on how to do business in Africa. Having said that, we say to people that we are driven by our belief that everybody deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. But what you see from the statistics when you read is that not everyone in the continent really does enjoy the benefits of a modern connected life. We have a huge amount of young people, especially that are left behind. They don't have connectivity, they don't have access to smartphones, the challenges are long. Having said that again, I think His Excellency Wamgele mentioned an issue around the triple Cs that we've been reading about. The issue around conflict in most of our markets, the issues around climate change, the issues that we have around just COVID-19 that we haven't really truly recovered from COVID, but now we have more challenges. What does that mean for the continent? We need to embrace the AfCFTA because it's one opportunity we have where we can all come together and look at the continent as a singular and find opportunities on how we overcome and recover from the challenges we have. So from an MTN perspective, it's not an issue anymore that are we excited? It's a matter that we need to sit down and look at opportunities and truly look at how we can contribute. So from our perspective, I think a lot of things have been said around how we can contribute as business, but from where I'm standing, there's just 3 challenges that business have that we really all need to look at as a continent and see how we overcome. The issue around infrastructure. And MTN, for instance, in FY22, we spent about 149 billion rands in terms of networks and IT, etc. It's not enough. We cannot do it alone. You look at issues around harmonization of regulatory frameworks and policies around the continent to ensure that businesses are conducive to do their own business around the continent. That still remains a challenge. Thirdly, for us, from our perspective, just the ease of movement of goods and people, the issues around visas. So we're really looking forward to working together with the Secretary General's office in terms of just really mapping from what are the priority areas. You talk about payment systems. MTN today has got more than 60 million subscribers on mobile money financial services. That's a huge number. There's a lot of people that we are financially including, which is something very important from us from a perspective of digital and financial inclusion. But when we look at the payment system that has been established, how can MTN meaningfully contribute? Not just that we talk about it, but how can we actually map out the opportunities of how can we work together to make sure that it's of benefit of Africans?
I mean, so digitalization is a very catchy phrase at the moment, and so is the fourth industrial revolution. And many people say, what do you mean? We're already living in the fourth industrial revolution. The fact that you're just sitting there with the tablet in front of you, you're in it. But how do we make it make sense for the advancement of a trade agenda? What can telecommunications companies do to take a continental free trade area forward? What are the synergies that are needed between yourselves and the banks, for instance, to help to make the protocols and the processes smooth for the women that Dr. Amani was talking about, those SMEs?
So for instance, it's a good question. When we talk about advancement of the continent, there is a concept that I've heard of people talking about soft skills, and we're talking about soft infrastructure. For us as MTN, that's such an important concept because we have to take people with us. The issues around capacity building, digital skills, and making sure that young people, women, etc., participate in the economy of the continent will remain very important. We want to come to the party for the benefit not only for MTN, because if you look at what we do, technology is an enabler for development. We need to make sure that we create the infrastructure and the opportunities for people and other businesses to thrive, especially if you look at young people. Our call really, the way we look at ourselves is that we need to ensure that young people in the continent are not just consumers of content, but we need to make sure that they can create, they can be tech entrepreneurs, they can be the next Elon Musk that we're seeing. But for that to happen, it's going to take a lot of will from both politicians and business to work together so that we make industrialization a reality for everyone.
Patricia, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, and I want to speak anecdotally. That my travels across the African continent, covering business, have led me to quite a few Coca-Cola bottling plants. And what I've seen in these factories, it's wonderful stuff, from recycling to the use of community-based cooperative organizations where women are then asked to be the distributors of a lot of these soft drinks into their rural communities. And then they start to form part of a traders network for this big beverage manufacturer.
So long before we were talking about a continental free trade area, Coca-Cola had understood what a value chain looks like in an African context. How can that be multiplied in other sectors?
Well, thanks for the question, Lerato, and thanks to I should start by saying, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this conversation, and especially thank you to the AfCFTA, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, for this opportunity. So let me go back a little bit to just say a bit about Coca-Cola. Most people know the brand, but what most people don't know is that we've been in Africa for about 95 years. Since the first day we sold our first bottle of Coca-Cola in South Africa in 1928, we've been expanding across Africa. A year later, we opened our first offices, and by 1970, we were in every country. Obviously, presence here, a beverage company across Africa, is creating millions and millions of jobs across our value chain. That value chain that you referred to, Lerato, that also includes women entrepreneurs. Now, imagine how exponentially that could really grow with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. For us, we're proud of the local partners that we're working with. We are committed to working with these local partners, local farmers, local suppliers, to really grow the economic prosperity across Africa. And having the AfCFTA implemented is going to be critical to even further expand that value chain, increase local production, and prosperity for all in Africa. So, really, a few things, even listening to the different conversations that, and the different speeches here today, some things we can agree on. First of all, it's the fact that it is Africa's time indeed to not just present ourselves as one big market for external manufacturing, or for external manufacturers to tap into, but also for local production. And for us at Coca-Cola, that's critical. Local production, it's a no-brainer. If we could move things across Africa, it's going to be so much cheaper to produce here. It's going to create the jobs in Africa and generally improve lives for all. So our strategy in Africa is so simple. It's about growing our business. It's about growing our talent, which is the people that work for Coca-Cola, and it's about growing the communities. One thing that's going to be critical, and one thing that everybody agrees is the biggest advantage of the free trade area, is scale. And let's go into a bit more detail about this scale. So it's not just expanding on the things that we already do by duplicating it in different places, but it's about making what we do even grow stronger because everybody has access to wider markets. Now let's talk about ingredient sourcing, for instance. Why do I keep finding that we are importing simple ingredients like, let's say, fruit puree from Asia or Latin America, when the sourced fruits that would act as the feedstock for our juices is abundantly available in Africa? Here's the issue, and I know that people have talked about this in several different ways, but just to bring it to life, if I move fruits from one country to the other, or if I need to create, let's say, a hub in one country and take it across Africa, it means that I need to be able to take it through several borders quickly enough for it not to perish in the process of simply moving. So unfortunately, that value chain will not be developed if that can happen. So we've talked about just moving it from country to country. Then when you get through the countries, because you're moving it across several different borders, you're going to be paying several different tariffs across the countries, just driving up the cost of the product. Automatically, that's not competitive. And then when you get into the final destination, unexpected, unpredictable tariffs, excise duties, taxes, things keep coming up that further drive up the cost and destroy the whole planning process. So if I may, one solution that I'd like to put forward, and maybe not a solution, but the start to finding a solution would be, can we create a few pilot projects that target certain industries and just move products from the start of the value chain to the final consumer across Africa, a few products, so that way we can learn together, we as industry and the AfCFTA, we can learn together what those barriers are in practice and start to fix them systematically so that we can really drive the momentum of the Africa Free Trade Area.
That's a great suggestion. And obviously, you've spoken from the experience on the consumer side, is that if it's costly for you to source inputs, raw materials, and to move it across borders, in the end, you're going to pass on that cost to the consumer. But as you were talking, I was thinking 90% of goods traveling through the African continent move by road. Now, it goes to a much bigger issue of infrastructure that was mentioned earlier on, which is we could do better to fix freight rail, cargo, in aviation, and also to sort out the quality of those roads. And I wonder logistically, what are some of the challenges you've experienced in moving product within markets and across borders?
Right. I think it's similar to what everyone else has talked about. I know that it's well documented and we've talked about the non-tariff barriers, and that's why I wanted to focus on standardization and harmonization of tariffs, duties, first of all, the rates. You know, if everybody would honor the regional economic community guidelines and also honor the fact that these goods moving from place to place hitch-free is what's going to make this whole thing successful, then that would be a great step in the right direction. The other area of harmonization and standardization is when it comes to implementing and increasing duties and tariffs that are already in place. If the government, the regional economic community, and organized industry sector can work together to provide inputs and at least understand when things will be implemented, when things will be changed, then it helps for better planning, which is what gets job creation and economic growth.
Okay. So I've got one final question for each panelist. It's the same question, and you can think about how you're going to answer it. So we've heard about the problems being around tariff duties, experiences at the border, customs and excise, and then broader infrastructure issues as well. So I'd like you to figure out, for you personally, the biggest problem in actualizing an African continental free trade area, and then make a suggestion how to solve it. So let's start with you, John Don Bosco Kalisa.
Yeah. I mentioned that the biggest problem across Africa, not only in East Africa, is the prevalence of non-tariff barriers. Our border procedures are very cumbersome. The World Bank did a study, the one on income gain. They said that the biggest gain from CFTA will emanate from trade facilitation, removing border-related barriers, removing visa requirement for business. If you are coming here, why should you take 5 days to apply for a visa when you are coming to East Africa? Right? These are fundamental questions that relate to our mindset, how we are structured. Why should we? The same for open skies. why do we impose charges for our own airline, African airlines? It is very expensive to travel from Nairobi to Cape Town than travel from Nairobi to United States of America because of the fees, charges we impose to our own airlines. So can we remove those detrimental fees and charges for our own airlines, for the visa, remove the visa for Africans to move across Africa? Okay. So those are the barriers we are talking about. Okay. These are the real barriers for business. Otherwise, there are enormous potential for doing business in Africa, for doing business across Africa. But the biggest challenge is non-tariff barrier, what we call cabotage, our legal and regulatory environment that is not supportive for doing business.
And I think you're raising an interesting thing, is we're focused on the movement of goods, but we also need the movement of great skills to help develop and nurture industries in other countries. Can we get a view from you, please, Fayaz Rizvi?
Yeah, the one thing which I believe is going to completely accelerate and tremendous growth behind it is standardization for me, for us, for consumer goods. Standardization of requirements to register a product in one market versus the other is so diverse that even if we establish the infrastructure, if we don't standardize it, it won't go anywhere. Second is standardization of import requirements across the markets. Even if you develop the infrastructure, if we don't standardize the importation documentation requirements, it sounds very basic, but it's very, very cumbersome to move product from one market to the other. If we are able to do that, and if we put the heads of states and the people related together to get this eliminated, then all of the things will flow through. And then people would come in, services would come in, and just give you an anecdote. If I have to move a product from Egypt to Nigeria, I have to go through Europe and come back. I don't have a transportation lane. The documentation is so cumbersome that it has to go up and down. Just an anecdote to illustrate that.
All right, standardization. Dr. Manias, for one problem that you think, deal with this and will unlock something.
Empowering the African private sector is huge. Awareness and information. Actually, one thing, I call it 10 INS. 10 INS is indigenous capacity building over African private sector, infrastructure and energy, information communication technology, investment and access to credit. I am happy here my brother Orama is there because it's very important for our financial institution and also VP for African Development Bank. And really, it's about also science and technology. It's very important, industrialization and science and technology.
And I think
so for us, as my brother said, also harmonization, which is, we are talking about pharmaceutical products. We have pharmaceutical products here. We have in Kenya. We have in Egypt. Egypt, we have 165 pharmaceutical industry. But in order to have it trade, you have to register each product in each of the 55 countries of the African continent. It's not possible. So we need to have set up the high standard of the criteria, and then once it is registered in one country, then it's registered there. That's the main issue of of really accelerating our AfCFTA.
I think you've said something really important, which is the science and innovation part, because we know that 10 years ago, they say the top 10 companies in the world were companies like IBM and some of the auto manufacturers. Today, it's Apple, Alphabet, Google, and that's all happened in a matter of a decade and a bit.
Innovation and
innovation
technology
really matters, because those companies invest about 10% of their profits in innovation every single year. It matters.
Yeah, and one of the things also we're talking about innovation and young startups, because we have also a project which is called Hunting for Africa's Unicorns. How those African startups, which is focusing on innovation, on e-tech, on health tech, on education tech, come together and we support them, because those are our future of the African continent.
Fantastic. Innovation for African unicorns. Nompilo Morafe, the biggest problem that you think could be addressed would be a catalyst for change?
So for me, Lerato, really is the issue around infrastructure deficit. I feel like if you look at the continent holistically, if we don't fix that, we're just never going to really get everybody developed at the same time. So we have such fragmented infrastructure in the continent that you find community one will have schools, another community will not have a school. We need to really come together to look at how we fix, how we invest into the infrastructure and prioritize what comes first. I think for me, when we went through COVID and we got a call from the AU to assist in terms of donating for the vaccines, that was so clear to us as a company that we need to do more in terms of investment in infrastructure so that we don't find ourselves on a back foot every time something like that happens.
Great stuff. Thank you for that. And Patricia Obozua from Coca-Cola. Big problem, big solution.
Well, let me just say that at Coca-Cola, we're 100% supportive of all the objectives of the AfCFTA. The big thing is scale. If we can remove the barriers to scale that I had outlined earlier by standardization and harmonization across all the different countries, then I believe that we will be solving a big problem that takes us to achieve this ambition of one common market that we want to drive towards.
And those volumes I mentioned earlier on, that's exactly what it is. We need to be trading big numbers, thinking big. And that's the one way to eliminate that. I'd like to thank our panel for just giving us the broad brushstrokes, and just to say, over the next 2 days, obviously there are going to be many panels that really do what they call a deep dive into some of these issues. So today it was just the tidbits, just to get a sense of the things we should be thinking about when we talk about what free trade could look like at the individual, granular, sectoral and company level, and we got a sense of how to do it. So thank you very much to you, Patricia Obozua, the Vice President for Public Affairs and Communications and Sustainability at Coca-Cola. Thank you to you, Ms. Nompilo Morafe, the Public Affairs Executive at the MTN Group. Thanks to you, Dr. Amani Asfour, the President for the Africa Business Council. We want to thank you, Mr. Fayaz Rizvi, the CEO for Sub-Saharan Africa at Procter & Gamble, and welcome, because you said you're new, so welcome to the motherland. And Dr. Don Bosco Kalisa, the President of the East African Business Council. Thank you, the CEO. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Very much. Okay, and I think you can take your leave.
And we have a photo.
All right, we have a final.
We have a photo.
Oh, is there a photo opportunity?
Together.
All right, if the photographer could make his or her way. Thank you very much to our high-level panelists, and thank you for an engaging conversation. I think they deserve another round of applause. And also another correction for all of you who've been looking for the Wi-Fi code. It is ABF 2023 and then an exclamation mark at the end. Exclaim. All right, we've come to the final part of our agenda, and if I may beg your indulgence, we've come to the final part of our agenda, and closing off the day for us is he who opened the session for us, but the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition here in South Africa will now be speaking on behalf of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa. And so please welcome warmly Minister Ibrahim Patel on behalf of His Excellency Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa.
His Excellency Mahamadou Issoufou, the former President of Niger and the AfCFTA champion, Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the AfCFTA Secretariat, Excellency Baleka Mbete, former Deputy President of South Africa, Professor Benedict Orama, President of the Afexim Bank, and other representatives of development institutions, Minister Naledi Pandor, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, Honorable Ministers, Deputy Ministers, and representatives from African Union member states, ambassadors and distinguished dignitaries, business leaders, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. As this opening session draws to a close, it is my pleasure to extend to you the very warm greetings of His Excellency, President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, who wish to welcome you to South Africa. President Ramaphosa agreed to host this business forum in South Africa as a signal of his personal and South Africa's backing and support to the efforts to get the private sector actively involved in the next phase of implementation. The President has asked that his personal warm wishes be conveyed to his brother, His Excellency Isufu, and to the representatives of the African Union and the political and business representatives here today. President Ramaphosa is unable to be present today in person and has asked me to convey his remarks to the delegates to the Business Forum, which I now do. The AfCFTA has the potential to significantly boost economic growth and inclusion on the continent. The private sector is a critical partner in unlocking that opportunity. We are therefore pleased to co-host this inaugural AfCFTA Business Forum with the AfCFTA Secretariat and to join in shaping the narrative of Africa's integration and economic future. We welcome African leaders, delegates, and executives who have traveled from across the continent and other parts of the world to be with us here today during the course of the forum. This forum will help to forge close collaboration between the public and private sector institutions in order to accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA. While the AfCFTA negotiations were led by governments and ratified by national legislative bodies, businesses are key drivers in the next phase of the project. The AfCFTA offers the business community an opportunity to scale up and expand their markets to meet the demand of a growing population that is expected by 2050 to reach 2.5 billion people, whose economic activities will generate a combined GDP of 29 United States trillion dollars. Total investable wealth held on the continent is also on the rise, reaching, according to one study, about $2.4 trillion in 2022. Thus, the implementation of the AfCFTA can unlock significant opportunities for those entrepreneurs and investors who are daring to lead and position themselves to capitalize on the opportunities that this agreement presents. It can support our efforts with greater food and health security. It can create jobs for young people. The question is, where and how do we start? I want to offer 4 thoughts. First, we need to prioritize industrialization. Industrialization has powered the economies of Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization has taken China and many parts of Asia from conditions of poverty to strong and resilient economies. This is Africa's moment to industrialize. There are opportunities to expand Africa's production of pharmaceuticals, cars, agro-processing products, clothing and textiles, and indeed many other goods. COVID-19 and the disruption of supplies reinforce the lesson that Africa must produce more of its own food, medicine, and other essential supplies. Aside from supplying the African market, this will also provide the basis for a more balanced trade with the rest of the world. As the world goes greener to address climate change, Africa must not allow itself to be left behind. Current and future global demand for electric vehicles create the opportunity to develop mineral beneficiation value chains anchored on critical raw materials that we have in abundance on the continent for the manufacture of electric vehicle components. To drive industrialization, we need to set ambitious rules of origin so that we add more value to the products that benefit from preferential trade. Indeed, I call on trade ministers to be bolder in setting high African content requirements, to revisit existing rules of origin and revise them upwards, and to set ambitious targets with the outstanding rules of origin. The trade agreement will not succeed if it simply encourages transshipment of products where a significant part of the product is made outside the continent with limited value addition on the continent. We need an African pharmaceutical industry making vaccines and active pharmaceutical ingredients, and African chocolate producers and firms making tractors and trucks on the African continent with components that are also sourced from our continent. Second, we need to prioritize investment in the industrial economy, in new sectors, and crucially, in infrastructure. We seek higher levels of fixed investment in which African investors commit new investment in each other's economies. As African governments, we will all need to ensure rule of law, avoid arbitrary executive action, and avoid making it onerous for businesses to operate. We are open and welcome foreign investment from across the world. We must also mobilize African savings to ensure that it is invested in our economies to help grow our GDPs and jobs for young people. A particular focus of investment must be on infrastructure to make it possible to provide the energy, logistics and transport systems and water supplies required for industry and commerce, and of course, for citizens and communities. Our logistics and supply chains connectivity need to be upgraded to ensure a smooth flow of goods and services within and among African countries. The digital economy requires very significant investment. The World Bank estimates that $100 billion investment is needed to achieve universal access to broadband connectivity in Africa to create the modern infrastructure we need. We have the capacity to harness the power of the sun, the wind, and Africa's great rivers to supply energy. We are ready for a partnership with the private sector for large new investment in the supply of energy. Third, we need to build on existing production capacities and strengths while building regional value chains, expanding these progressively. We can capitalize on the expanded geographic footprint of several African firms who are already operating outside their home markets. These are African champions. Although already we have significant capabilities in a number of sectors, stretching from manufacturing to finance and retail, to cement, to ICT and construction. If we take the narrow view and see them simply as Ghanaian firms, or South African firms, or Kenyan firms, or Nigerian or Egyptian businesses, and therefore simply as rivals, and if we do not celebrate their successes, and if we put obstacles in their way, our economies as a whole will continue to underperform and Africans will continue to be poor. We can and should instead take the broader view of encouraging African champions to rise and see that part of their commercial role will be to foster integrated supply chains so that all parts of the continent can benefit from industrialization. Finally, we must promote innovation as a platform for industrialization. Innovation is a driver for advanced manufacturing and for products to be developed that are appropriate to the needs of African markets and societies. The AfCFTA offers an opportunity for the African continent to leverage technologies such as artificial intelligence,
the digital economy and digital trade to close the gap between Africa and the rest of the world. This can empower small and medium enterprises and the large majority of our population across the continent. The development of a common set of standards, for example, in medical products, can ensure that the products made in Africa under the AfCFTA can compete with those made in international markets outside the continent. Innovation requires that we invest more in our human capital and take measures to boost levels of productivity and the quality of our products. Above all, to grow sustainably, Africa must invest more in research and development. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our sincere hope that this business forum will be more than just a platform for the exchange of ideas and for making new acquaintances. Rather, it must serve as a mobilizing platform to get businesses geared up for the significant opportunities that lay ahead. I therefore call on the private sector and government representatives to take advantage of this business forum to present innovative and practical solutions to unlock the opportunities as we seek to accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA. I wish you all success in the deliberations, and most importantly, I wish you all prosperity as you embark on this important journey. I thank you. Thank you very much.
We'd like to thank you, Honourable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, and we want to thank you for reminding us the commitment, the dedication of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa. And without further ado, we'd like to say this is the end of the official day one of the inaugural Business Forum for the African Continental Free Trade Area. I hope it gives you a sense of the discussions that will take place over the next 3 days. Discussions we implore on you to participate in, to enter into robustly and to be frank, because as we said earlier on, we have a sense of what the problems are. We really want to talk solutions. And a lot of fora, get locked into problems. And what we really want to know is how to level up and move to a new state of perspective, transaction, and doing business in Africa. And we hope that will be the tone. More than anything else, we started the day conjuring up the spirit for rain, for blessings and prosperity. And the Honourable Minister ended with exactly those words from the President, wishing us prosperity, because that's what Africa wants. It's prosperity that will change the trajectory for the continent. Indeed, and I think we're going to have an excellent 2 days. Tomorrow there's a different setup. We're going to sort of drill down, deep dive, so to speak, on a number of issues. We've got a few plenary sessions, and then we're going to have breakout sessions through the day. It starts off, I think, with a recap of what happened today, and then I'm going to take a session on something I really feel very passionately about, value addition, which is extremely important, and we heard many people speak about it today. Yeah, and there'll be testimonials as well, because even though we're talking in broad terms about African trade, the truth of the matter is Africa's share of global trade is less than 3%, but inter-African trade over the years has grown to about 30% of goods and services that move across the continent. So there's been progress made, and we want to hear from some of the game changers. And so there will be quite a few fireside chats with people who are actually doing the work, whether it's at a corporate level or at a policy-making level, will also share their insights. And nobody can say we Africans don't have dexterity, grit, and can-doism. They all sat through all that, and you're still here, which is proof positive of just how much you can take.
But we thank you very much for your attention. And we're going to wrap it up now, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think just one note, because it would be remiss for us not to apologize for the delayed start this morning.
Yes, indeed.
There were a few challenges with registration, but we really appreciate your patience, and not just your patience, your staying to the very, very end. We see you, we recognize it, we appreciate you.
Yeah, and I think you and I are proof positive, right, that we can work together because, I mean, you're South African and I'm Nigerian.
And you're Nigerian.
Yeah, so I mean, this is intra-Africa interaction happening right now.
I will say this, though. As a South African who loves going to Nigeria and West Africa, you guys got good jollof.
Yeah.
But the Ghanaians got better jollof.
Okay. As long as the rice is processed and packaged in Africa, I'll let that slide.
So let it slide. Here's to African trade, networking next door in hall number 10. Please enjoy cocktails and canapes, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Take care.